Atoyan was a hot place. Like a really hot place. So hot that rebels weren't even allowed to work on certain periods of the day, unless they risked fainting due to heatstroke. However, despite all the warnings and risks about working under such conditions, a young pair of teens could be seen foregoing all of them and toiling away outside of the shade. Or rather, one of them was. "You missed a spot," Ezra, the teenage girl known as Sabine, said, fanning herself as she lounged in a chair under the shade. Ezra, the teenage boy who was sweating his ass off under absolutely no roof, glared at her in response before returning his attention back to brushing her canvas. There were no words which could be used to describe how delighted Sabine felt at Ezra's silent compliance. Sure, maybe it wasn't the nicest thing to force him to repaint her entire canvas under the hot sun. But it was his fault for spilling an entire canister's worth of paint and erasing about a week's worth of her own concentrated effort. So, it was only fair to have him pay her back this way. No, Sabine chastised. "You painted over that spot a little too much, Ezra. Remember, you need to use light strokes. Lighter than what I am doing now." Ezra exclaimed. "Yep," Sabine replied, chuckling. "It might be better for you to start over." "Again?" Ezra said exasperatedly. He narrowed his eyes at his giggling friend, putting his arms on his hips with a huff. "I think you're having a bit too much fun with this ordering me around. I guarantee you it is not fun to have my painting be splattered with random colors after spending half the week on it," Sabine replied with a glare in her words. "Watching you attempt to be artistic, however, is another story." "Ha ha, laugh all you want, Sabine," Ezra replied as he turned back to her canvas. "Maybe next time when you run out of paints, I'll forget to get you some. See how much you enjoy being cut off from your supply." "Yeah, you do that, Ezra. But don't come crying to me when you have a water-resistant pink mustache on your face," Sabine retorted back. Although he didn't give a response, Sabine could hear Ezra quietly chuckling as he continued on with his brushing. Trying to reach a particular tall spot on her canvas, Ezra stretched his arms out to get higher up. His muscles involuntarily flexed against his tight shirt, giving Sabine quite the view. She took note of the various ways in which his body had changed, how his vest which used to hang over his body now constricted it, and how his once lanky arms had changed into quite the digits. A momentary thought flashed in her mind as she imagined being embraced in those warm appendages, and for a moment Sabine shivered in anticipation. "Damn," Sabine quietly whispered to herself. No matter how hard she denied it, his body was definitely something she enjoyed watching. "Did you say something, Sabine?" The object of her admiration called out. "Nope. Nothing at all." "Never said anything," Sabine replied a little too quickly. Ezra arched his eyebrow, but kept his back towards her. He kept his focus towards Sabine's canvas for a little while longer, until a booming voice called out back from the base. "Captain Sabine Wren, Commander Sato has requested your presence in the docking bays," the announcement called out. Looks like someone's in trouble," Ezra said as he smirked at her. "Want me to come with to help bail you out?" "Not a chance, Loat Rat," Sabine replied with a smirk of her own. "There's no way I'm letting you get out of cleaning your own mess." "Oh well, can't blame me for trying," Ezra replied with a light chuckle. Underscore 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 underscore. Sabine wasn't too sure why Command was calling out to her. It was weird that only she and not any of the other Spectres were being called out to meet Sato. If it was Hera or Kanan in her position, however, then it would make sense, as they would need to be briefed on whatever new assignment they were getting, before deciding which of the Spectres could be assigned to it. But if it was only her, it would mean that whatever this was, it was a personal matter. And if it was personal, it probably meant that she was about to receive some form of reprimand. Despite considering herself to be a model soldier, Sabine was actually anything but. While her skills and knowledge were definitely something which made her stand out, Sabine's artistic tendencies were something of a sore spot for any rebel commander. There wasn't a flat surface on the base which Sabine's hands hadn't touched, and there was no limit to how much she wanted to let loose around the base. While in her opinion, her various graffitis were great visually, not all of the higher-ups appreciated her artistic talents. Especially the more militaristic ones. Usually though, Sabine did not mind getting chewed out. But she definitely did not want to use her one free day for that. Especially since this was one of those days in which Kanan did not need Ezra for his Jedi training, and she knew how rare that was. "Commander Sato," Sabine said with a salute as she approached him. "How may I help you?" Captain Ren Sato greeted as he turned to face her. "Can you please list down to me the individuals who should have knowledge of this base?" Sabine held back the urge to roll her eyes, but gave a reply anyway. "Only rebels, Commander." "Good, it seems like you do know. Then perhaps you can explain to me why your friend, who is not a rebel, has managed to find her way here," Sato said as he pointed his finger towards a very familiar figure. "Ketsu," Sabine said in a surprised voice. "See. I told you she knows me," Ketsu exclaimed as she shoved off a few of the rebels surrounding her. "Now stop being so handsy with me. You're not my type anyways," she harumphed, stomping her way towards Sabine. "Hey partner," Ketsu said as she slung an arm around Sabine's shoulder. "Fancy meeting you here." "Ketsu," Sabine repeated again. "What are you even doing here?" "Oh, you know, I wanted to get a tour of this base which you told me so much about." A nervous bead of sweat rolled down Sabine's forehead as she tried to ignore Sato's questioning glare. "I swear, I didn't tell her anything about this place," she insisted. "I would be inclined to believe you, Captain. But her presence here seems to imply otherwise," Sato replied. "Oh, don't worry, she didn't tell me much," Ketsu pointed out with a wave of her hand. "But I am dying for a chance to look around. I'm sure that there's a lot around here for me to check out." "That would not be something I recommend." "I'm sure it will be alright," Ketsu said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Besides, Sabine would definitely be more than enough to stop me from peering too much into your rebel secrets," she added before dragging a completely unwilling Sabine away. Underscore 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 underscore. It seemed that Sato and his men did trust Sabine enough to let Ketsu leave without too much trouble. Although Sabine did not appreciate being given the responsibility to watch over her old partner when she had more interesting things to do. "What are you even doing here?" Sabine asked tersely, pulling Ketsu to a halt. She glared at her sharply, making sure that her disapproval was known. "And I'm not showing you around. You suddenly coming here without a reason is way too suspicious already." "Can't I come here to see an old friend?" Ketsu replied as she blinked her eyes innocently. "You can, but I know you won't." Fine," Ketsu relented as she released Sabine from her grip. "I just needed to be around someone, that's all." Sabine's face softened in surprise. The tone in Ketsu's voice sounded vulnerable. And she knew that Ketsu was never vulnerable. "Why? What happened?" "Nothing too serious," Ketsu replied with a downcast smile. "Just needed to take my mind off the galaxy for a while." "How's life here?" "Just like the usual," Sabine replied. "Things have been getting pretty hectic around here lately. I barely have any time for myself." She turned to look at Ketsu, a worried look formed on her face as she saw Ketsu's troubled expression. "Are you sure you're alright?" "As good as I'll ever be," Ketsu replied with a light chuckle. But even her laughter had no joy behind it. "It's just some of the things I saw before I came here," she continued with a sigh. "The Empire is getting more and more messed up by the minute. I guess I just couldn't take it anymore." "What did they do?" "Nothing good," Ketsu replied with a downcast look. The memory of what had happened caused her to shrink back into her mind a little, but Sabine's comforting hand helped ease her back out of it. "I stayed with one of your rebel cells in the Midrim a few months ago. They were nice, offered me food, shelter and a place to unwind. All they asked in exchange was for me to do some menial jobs. Carry that box there, clean that ship." A smile formed on Ketsu's face as she reminisced. "It was a good thing we had, definitely more than I deserved. But then the Empire found us. Apparently we had a mole, some skeevy bastard who would do anything to get some credits. They hit us hard," Ketsu continued. "Took out nearly everything we had. But the rebels who worked there were smart. Managed to stick it out long enough to launch a few hit-and-run attacks. And when I joined up in some of their operations, it was actually like we stood a chance. Of course they did, it's you, Sabine said with a comforting smile. If anyone can hold back the Empire with a single blaster, you can. But Sabine's kind words did not do anything to improve Ketsu's mood. If only that were the end of the story, Ketsu replied dryly. I went out on patrol one day to scout a location a little far out from the base. They hadn't attacked us in a while, so I was worried that they were planning some kind of large-scale assault. But instead what happened next was much worse. What happened? They bombed them, Sabine. Bombed every single speck of dust on the base. It was like they decided that it wasn't worth keeping any of them alive anymore. When I heard the explosions, I ran back as fast as I could. But I was too late. By the time I arrived, not even dust was left behind, Ketsu said as she shut her eyes. They took everything out. Even the surrounding villages. The base wasn't even nearby, but the Empire didn't want to take any chances. They wanted dead rebels, and if innocents got in the way of that, so be it. A feeling of horror washed over Sabine. She knew all too well about the atrocities of the Empire, but she hadn't expected it to have become this bad. Ketsu, Sabine said as she placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, that must have been a horrible experience. Ketsu shook her head dismissively, shrugging off Sabine's hand. It was, but I'm getting used to it. I just needed some time off, get my mind to focus on something else. Sabine placed her hand on Ketsu's shoulder. Whatever you need, Ketsu, I'm here for you. A sly smirk made its way on Ketsu's face as she lifted her head. Well, there is one thing you can help me with. She casually walked over to Sabine, the cheeky look never leaving her face. I am hoping to get some companionship. Companionship? Yes, some very intimate companionship. Sabine blinked once, then twice. It was only after her third time did Ketsu's message finally reach her. No. I'm flattered, but I don't swing that way. What? No. Sabine, don't be gross, Ketsu said as she backed away. I meant male companionship. Just a quick fling, a one-night stand. Chilling in bed, you know what I mean. Yes, unfortunately I do, Sabine said with a groan. Surely you would have known some guys by now, right? Just point me towards one, and I'll be on my way. Ketsu, that's disgusting, Sabine said. I don't even know who I would suggest. Don't you hang out with 3 other guys on a daily basis? Ketsu argued, causing the disgust on Sabine's face to intensify. They're family. Sabine exclaimed. Yeah, which is why it should make it easy for me to hit it, Ketsu said, making suggestive postures with her hands. Come on, just one night, I promise it won't last. Ketsu, no, Sabine said as she stormed off. What about that burly guy? He has a big figure, Ketsu asked quickly, following in step behind her. I'm sure he would be fun to be around. Zeb's like an uncle. And are you sure you want to cuddle with someone that furry? Okay, point taken, Ketsu replied but kept on pushing. What about the older Jedi? Jedi are hot. Always with their no attachments rule and all that, makes it kind of naughty when they actually have one. He's taken, and I don't want to get on Hera's bad side. Okay, Ketsu rubbed her chin for a while before remembering the last person. What about Ezra? I think he's kind of cute. He's about the right build and age, and I think he's just about my type. Sabine planted her heels in the sand as she spun to point a harsh finger at Ketsu. That is a hard no, she stated firmly. Well, I guess he's yours already. Don't worry, I won't lay a finger on him. Confusion danced on Sabine's features as she processed Ketsu's words. He's not, we're not. She tried to say but was cut off by Ketsu. Wait, you're not together yet. He's like my brother. Sabine argued, although she wasn't so confident of that herself. Sabine, I've seen your brother. You two act nothing like that. The way you look at each other is more than enough for me to know that something is going on between you two. There's nothing going on between us. At most he's my best friend. Nothing more, nothing less. Then you wouldn't mind me making a move on your best friend now, wouldn't you? Ketsu threw her own words right back at her. Because if you did, then that would mean that there is actually something between the two of you. Sabine glared at Ketsu's obvious taunting, wondering to herself if there was some truth in her words. Go right ahead, she said, surprising herself. Well, don't mind if I do, Ketsu replied with a victorious smile. Underscore 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 underscore. Oh my gosh, are you Ezra Bridger? Ketsu exclaimed in an excessively girly voice. She had her hands on her cheek, coupled with a dramatic expression on her face. With the tip of his brush centimeters off the canvas, Ezra turned around to look at the source of the adoring voice. He found himself staring right at a wide-eyed girl. One that seemed to be familiar to him but he just couldn't quite recognize. Hey, Ezra said a little awkwardly. He glanced around her, hoping that there was someone nearby who could help him identify this person. Do I know you? A tinge of disappointment flashed across Ketsu's face, but she didn't let that deter her. I wouldn't think so, she said, batting her eyelashes. But I've seen you around the base quite a few times. I always wanted to talk to you, but whenever I see the look in your eyes, I always get so nervous. Ketsu slowly approached him, eyes wandering lustfully across his body. It took a lot of courage for me to just call out to you. Oh, good for you. Ezra replied with an awkward smile. Who are you again? Kei. Ketsu stopped herself before saying her actual name. Kesha Yoon, she said confidently. Kesha. Don't think I've heard of you before, Ezra said a little suspiciously. Oh, I'm no one special, Ketsu said as she grabbed Ezra's hands. Not like you, she blinked her eyes rapidly at him. To any man, they might have completely broken down at what was happening in front of them. But this was Ezra. And the only emotion Ezra was feeling in this situation was confusion. You might not want to cling to me too hard, Ezra said as he pointed at the stains on his clothes. I'm a bit dirty after painting for so long. Ketsu stared hungrily as Ezra unconsciously flexed his muscles. Oh, were they making her thirsty? I don't mind being dirty, especially if it's with you. Ketsu batted her eyelashes again, but Ezra was only feeling more confusion. Meanwhile, somewhere off in the distance, Sabine was quietly watching the interaction between the two. She couldn't exactly hear them, but from the way Ketsu clung at Ezra, she could tell that it was getting intimate. A fire was burning in her heart. Maybe it was jealousy, or maybe it was frustration. But the dim embers were nothing compared to the burning irritation Sabine was feeling over how her best friend was reacting to the situation. Just push her away. Sabine practically screamed in her head. How could you let her rub her entire body against you? Sabine had resolved herself to simply be an observer. But the moment she saw Ketsu pucker her lips and slowly lean towards Ezra, she had enough. And there weren't a lot of things that could stop Sabine from storming right over. Ketsu! Sabine screamed as she stomped on over. Wait, Ketsu! Ezra said as he turned to look at her. Hang on, aren't you Sabine's bounty hunter friend? Great, now you realize, Ketsu said with a roll of her eyes. Noticing that Sabine was only getting closer to her, a final cheeky thought formed in Ketsu's mind. She pulled Ezra's arm closer to her body, keeping it as close to her chest as possible. Sabine's looking quite scary, Ezra. I hope you can protect me from her, she said as she wiggled her eyebrows. Get your hands off of him. Sabine said in a jealous rage as she ripped Ketsu away from Ezra. Now Sabine, remember what we talked about just now. Don't be such a jello. Shut up, Sabine said in a dangerous whisper, cutting Ketsu off. She practically dragged Ketsu back to the docking bays, intent on bringing her away from the confused Jedi. Wait, Sabine. What's Ketsu doing here? Ezra asked in an attempt to get some clarification about the situation. Sabine turned back to face Ezra, staring at him with a pointed glare. Absolutely nothing, you hear me? This never happened. You never saw her, she said before continuing to drag Ketsu off. Oh come on, Sabine. Ketsu groaned. I was just about to get to the best part. Not with him, you're not, Sabine bit back. You could at least introduce me to someone else if you're so insistent on keeping him to yourself, Ketsu whispered in a hushed tone. Who knows, I may accidentally let it slip that you're jealous. Sabine narrowed her eyes dangerously at her friend. She leveled a sigh in resignation, raising a finger towards Ketsu. Fine, I'll introduce you to someone, but that's all the help you're getting from me. Ketsu practically leapt with joy. I knew you'd come through. So who is it? She asked excitedly. One of Hera's pilots, Sabine replied. I don't know him that well, so he should be just fine for you. Watching them disappear from his sight, Ezra let out a relenting sigh. He was sure Sabine wasn't coming back so soon. Having to deal with Ketsu suddenly being on this base was probably trouble enough. Bringing his attention back towards the flat rock which made up Sabine's canvas, Ezra tried not to feel too disappointed at not being able to spend some time with Sabine. It was such a waste after all. While he could definitely do without the sun, he really did enjoy hanging out with her. Underscore 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 underscore. Watching as the ship which Ketsu arrived in finally took off, Sabine let out a huge sigh of relief. It was like an entire week's worth of energy had been drained from her, despite only coming to visit for a single day. Stepping away from the docking port, Sabine was about to go look for Ezra before she crashed right into none other than Wedge Antilles. Wedge. What's the rush? Sabine asked. Sabine. Where did she go? Wedge asked frantically. Ketsu. She left. I thought I told you she wasn't going to stay for long. Panic settled in Wedge's eyes as he flung his head in his arms. No 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 no, he said as he paced around anxiously. She told me that she would wake me up. Sabine arched her eyebrow at the panicking boy. Well, she did say she wanted to leave immediately. Wedge shook his head, still in despair. I didn't get to tell her I love her. He screamed, practically informing the whole hangar of his conundrum. Sabine watched with an agape mouth as Wedge dragged his feet along. What? Ezra asked as he suddenly appeared behind her. Did you have something to do with that? I don't want to talk about it, Sabine replied, immediately brushing the topic off. Sabine wouldn't realize it now, but she had just set into motion a very troublesome future for the young up-and-coming pilot. I look forward to our next meeting, Senator, the graceful Princess Leia said, bowing elegantly before exiting the room. Her expression was extremely decorous, maintaining its proper look right up until the doors slid close. Once she disappeared from the senator's sight, her serene expressions quickly gave way to one less seemly. Leia found herself frowning at the closed doors, somewhat frustrated at what had just happened. She had just come from an important meeting which involved Senator Mon Mothma, her father, and several other important figureheads who led the rebellion. The meeting was scheduled to discuss the future of their organization, and to figure out if there were any possible tactics which could be used, or propaganda they could spread to help improve their position against the Empire. But when her father offered to donate some more additional funding to help with these issues, some of the younger commanders accused him of trying to use his monetary advantages to exert more control over the rebellion. From what Leia could tell, they were starting to feel a little bit insecure about their contributions to the rebellion. And it didn't take long for arguments to break out after that. A weary sigh left Leia's lips as she trudged along the halls of the base. She had seen this as an opportunity to learn more about the rebellion, and was hopeful for the chance to find her place in the inevitable battles to come. But with the way that discussion had turned into a vulgar display of their insecurities and fears, Mon Mothma suggested that Leia excuse herself from the meeting. It wasn't something she liked, but even she had to agree that there wasn't much she could learn from their public screaming fest. Underscore 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 underscore. If there wasn't anything Leia could do to learn from such a meeting, then she would try and fill her time elsewhere. Unfortunately for her, there wasn't anything entertaining around the base to occupy her time with. It was a military installation after all. Excitement was probably the last thing on anyone's mind. That didn't stop her from feeling bored, however. As Leia wandered aimlessly throughout the base, she found her eyes lazily drifting all around her. Displays of camaraderie could be seen practically everywhere she looked, and from basically everyone she saw. Leia didn't have many friends to speak of on the base. Sure, she knew some people here and there, it wasn't her first time here after all. But their interactions with each other never went past the simple smile or wave of the hand. She figured that it had something to do with her being the princess of an entire planet. The title did make it hard for people to approach her, and her somewhat more mature attitude also gave others reason to avoid her more often. A melancholic sigh escaped her lips as she settled onto a nearby stone slab. Adventure was something Leia always dreamed of. Creating relationships with random strangers, going on life-threatening journeys, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Leia couldn't help but frown as she realized that she was probably going to live a coddled life. One which was going to be far different than what she would have liked. "Come on Sabine, are you even trying to hit me with those rocks?" Leia heard a familiar voice from a distance. She turned to look in that direction, eyes focusing on two figures. "Maybe I'm missing you on purpose. I don't think Kanan would like it very much if his prized apprentice came back with several bruises," Ezra the other figure replied with a cheeky smile. Unlike most of the names she heard before on the base, the name Ezra stuck out to her. It seemed quite familiar to Leia, as if she knew who it belonged to. Thankfully, it didn't take long for Leia to search her memories to finally come up with an answer. It was that kid from Lothal. Leia practically screamed into her head. It was no surprise that she didn't recognize him. So much about him had changed since she last saw him. The once terrible haircut he had basically shifted into a more clean-shaven one. His lanky arms had been beefed up, not too outrageously muscular, but large enough that they were going to at least draw some attention. It seemed the only thing that had yet to change was his outfit. But even then, the vest he wore did not look anything like it did all those years ago. In fact, it was actually looking quite good on him. Gone was the whiny kid she had met back then, and in its place stood a man. A very nice-looking man. And Leia would be lying if she said she didn't like what she saw. Leia continued to watch as Sabine threw some rocks at Ezra's direction while he deflected them with his lightsaber. It was some sort of force training, she presumed. One which seemed to train his reactions and sharpen his connection to the force. "Ow!" Leia heard Ezra exclaim as one particular rock struck his fingers. "You did that on purpose now didn't you?" he accused with a mock frown. "Why Ezra, I have no idea what you mean," Sabine replied dramatically. "I would have thought that a Jedi of your caliber was expected to foresee these attacks. Kanan would be very disappointed in your lack of progress." You did not just go there," Ezra said as he twirled his lightsaber. "Did you not see what I can do with this thing?" "Yeah, apparently you can't even deflect a rock properly," Sabine replied with an impish smile. "Says the Mandalorian who's too afraid to duel with me." The impish smirk grew even more wide on Sabine's face as she glared playfully at Ezra. "Hey, I never said I was afraid of dueling with you. I know that you know I can fight with a lightsaber just as well as you can. You should count yourself lucky that Kanan wants to keep my darksaber for now, otherwise your face and the floor will be getting very well acquainted with each other." Excuses. "I still think you're just afraid," Ezra said in a sing-song voice. It seemed that Ezra was very knowledgeable in the art of pushing Sabine's buttons. She reacted just as he would have predicted. Stomping her feet forwards, Sabine stopped just mere inches away from Ezra's face, jabbing a finger hard at his chest. "I'm going to make you regret saying those words to me, Bridger," she said toughly, but with a smile sneaking up her face. "Bring it on, Ren." Ezra accepted her challenge heartily as he watched her run off to get her weapon. Leia watched the entire exchange with her own playful smirk. It was refreshing to witness two friends just messing around with each other. And she had to admit, Leia felt a little bit jealous of Sabine. She had a friend whom she could trust, and was able to be herself around. It was something Leia could never experience, and probably would never be able to. As Leia silently watched Ezra continue to practice his forms alone, an idea popped into her head. She found herself striding over to him, a wide smile on her face. Perhaps just for this moment, she could get a taste of the experience she so desired. underscore 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 underscore. You know, girls like it more when you compliment them on their skills, Ezra. Challenging her abilities wasn't something very nice to do, Leia said from behind him. A silent yelp could be heard from him before he turned around to face Leia. Leia. What are you doing here? Ezra said as his eyes found hers. The slight feeling of butterflies tickled her stomach. You remember me? Leia said with a tinge of pink. Yeah, of course I do. You helped us with those ships on Lothal, right? It's hard to forget someone like you. The warm feeling in Leia's stomach only intensified. She smiled shyly at him, taking small steps as she slowly closed the distance. My, you sure know how to talk to girls now, don't you? I do. Ezra replied, arching his eyebrow. Sabine doesn't seem to think so. She always says that I'm a nervous wreck around any girl I find to be a little bit attractive. She seems to know a lot about you, doesn't she? Leia said with a knowing smile. Are you too close? I guess you could say that, Ezra said as he scratched the back of his head. We're so attached to the hip that I'd even say we're more like partners than best friends at this point, especially given how many missions we've done together. Ah, that's good for you, Leia said with a twinge of disappointment. So how long have you two been in a relationship? Relationship? Ezra asked with a tilt of his head. His ears went red as he realized what Leia was insinuating. Oh, we're not together, he quickly replied. We're pretty close, but that's about it. I used to have feelings for her, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't feel the same way. Well, that's a lie if I ever heard of one, Leia thought to herself. It was pretty clear to anyone that the feelings Ezra was describing wasn't just a one-way road. Maybe it did seem that way to him, but anyone with half a brain could also probably see that the two of them were basically two pieces of the same puzzle. But despite how made for each other the two of them were, Leia couldn't help herself from wanting to at least play out her fantasy a little more. Forgive my misunderstandings, I just saw the way you acted around each other and assumed, Leia said, referencing their moment before. Well, I guess we are pretty close, so I can see how people can come to that conclusion. You seemed pretty handy with that lightsaber, Leia continued. How long have you been training for? A couple of years, Ezra replied as he twirled his lightsaber. Although Kanan is much better than me. He's been training for far longer than I ever have. I think you're doing quite well yourself for not having any official training. You must have some kind of talent, because it seems so easy when you do it. A bashful smile took form on Ezra's face. Thanks, he replied with genuine emotion. Do you mind if I give it a try? Leia said as she leaned in closer to Ezra. You want to try using a lightsaber? Ezra asked. Leia nodded her head gingerly. Why? You don't think I can handle it? No. No. Ezra quickly defended. It's just, the only other person who's asked to learn lightsaber forms from me is Sabine, and half the time I feel like she doesn't even need my help. It's probably because she just wants to spend some time with you, Leia thought with a roll of her eyes. Well, maybe she doesn't, but I do, she repeated her request with a tilt of her head, allowing her bangs to cover her eyes. Well, if you insist, Ezra said unsure. Can you use the Force? I don't think so, but my father used to tell me that I can read emotions well enough. Okay, well that's not really the Force, but I guess you don't really need it for lightsaber training, Ezra replied. What about a lightsaber, do you have one by any chance? Leia shook her head. Can't I just use yours? A wave of red rushed over Ezra's face. You want to use mine? Aha. Ezra stared at the lightsaber in his hand before looking back at Leia. Am I not allowed? Leia asked with the beginnings of a pout. Well, it's just that a Jedi's lightsaber is like their life. And giving it to you would be very symbolic, Ezra replied. Leia couldn't help the cheeky smile forming on her face. Well, I promise I'll take real good care of it, she said as she clasped his hands. Surely a couple of minutes wouldn't be too bad. Ezra struggled to keep his head on straight at how close Leia was to him. I guess it wouldn't be so bad, he found himself saying. underscore 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 underscore. This ought to put Ezra in his place, Sabine said to herself as Kanan handed her the dark saber. Don't go too hard on him, Kanan reminded, placing his hands on his hips. You might make him skip out on tomorrow's training. No promises. Sabine shouted back before running on over to Ezra. Shaking his head, Kanan let out a sigh before heading back to his room. Kids these days. Underscore 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 underscore. Ecstatic was probably the word which could be used to describe Sabine right now. And the reason for her excitement. The opportunity to finally be able to spar with Ezra using a lightsaber. It had been ages ever since the day which she and Ezra last sparred. While she wasn't too sure about Ezra, Sabine loved sparring. She was a Mandalorian after all. But more than anything, she just loved the idea of challenging him at what was supposed to be one of his best skills. It didn't matter to her whether or not he beat her, she just enjoyed doing any activity with him. Her excitement, however, was unfortunately cut short as she turned the corner and saw what Ezra was doing with yet another additional woman. All right, 1, 2, 3, and again Ezra commanded as he stood in front of a familiar girl. She was following his instructions perfectly, executing the forms that she had learned previously from him, but doing so with much more precision than she ever did before. But the more surprising fact was that she was using his green lightsaber, something that not even Sabine herself got to do before. Hey, you're doing quite well for yourself. Ezra complimented, oblivious to Sabine's presence behind him. Well, I had a great teacher, Leia replied with a wink. Her eyes moved past Ezra, taking notice of the slightly awkward Mandalorian girl behind him. Sabine. You're back. Ezra said excitedly as he followed Leia's gaze. Ready to get your butt handed to you? I guess not, but, wait, who is this? Sabine asked, pointing a finger at Leia. Don't you remember? It's Leia, Ezra answered. It's nice to meet you again, Sabine, Leia said with a bow. What are you doing with Ezra's lightsaber? Sabine asked a little bit too pointedly. Oh, you know, he was just showing me some tricks, Leia said with an impish smile. He's very good with it, you know. She continued as she gently bumped her hips against Ezra's. I hope you can show me a lot more tricks, Ezra, Leia said suggestively, resting her hand against Ezra's chest. Leia could almost feel the fumes coming off of Sabine. She was angry, but didn't really know how to react to her with Ezra so close by. It was at this moment that Leia decided that perhaps the poor Mandalorian had been teased enough. With a quiet chuckle, she separated from Ezra, handing his lightsaber back to him. Well, this has been quite the experience, Ezra Bridger, Leia said with a bow of her head. I do hope we can see each other sometime soon. So do I, Ezra said with a warm smile, completely unaware of not only the inner turmoil being faced by Sabine, but also Leia's advances towards him. Turning to look at Sabine once more, Leia found that her conflicted face was just a little too amusing to ignore. Oh, maybe just one more thing before I leave, Leia cheekily thought to herself. She placed her hands once again on Ezra, but this time, she had her fingers on his chin. She moved her head so close to him with speed so fast that neither of them could react, and planted a warm kiss on his cheeks, quickly separating before Sabine could do anything drastic. That's for teaching me how to handle a lightsaber. Leia called out as she ran. Ezra stood by with his mouth agape, still processing what had just happened. While Sabine had to try and hold herself back from screaming bloody murder as the aforementioned princess simply bolted away. Well, that was unexpected, Ezra said with a slight blush as he touched her hand to his cheek. You seemed to enjoy it, Sabine blurted out suddenly. Ezra turned to face her, furrowing his brows in confusion at her reaction. Hey, are you alright? You're acting a bit weird ever since you saw Leia. I have not, Sabine defended a little too quickly. Sure. It's just, you let her use your lightsaber so easily, Sabine said, relenting under his gaze. You seem so protective over your lightsaber sometimes. You don't even let me hold it for long. But with her, you barely even know each other and you just handed it off to her. A look of understanding fell on Ezra's face as he turned to look at her. He placed a hand on her shoulders, gently squeezing it to comfort her. Sabine, you know what a Jedi's lightsaber means, right? Sabine nodded. It's supposed to be your life. It's not that I don't trust you enough to let you handle it, it's because what we have between us is so precious that I don't want to ruin it just because I'm giving you my lightsaber, Ezra explained. It's not something I take lightly. To me, it's not just my lightsaber. It's my life, and I don't want things to change if I give you such a heavy burden. What we have right now is just too important for me to risk losing it. A relieved smile made its way on Sabine's face. Ezra, you know I wouldn't change just because you let me use your lightsaber for a while, right? I trust you, and I know you trust me. Being able to use your lightsaber will just make us better partners for each other. Ezra returned her smile. Well, if you're okay with it. I'm better than okay with it, Sabine replied warmly. Now, I believe that the ground needs your face to wipe it with, she said as she flexed her lightsaber. Ezra chuckled, twirling his own in his hands. Let's see what you got. Imagine a day like no other. Warm skies, a peaceful setting, and a slow-blowing breeze. Now imagine that scenery with an Imperial base smack dab in the middle. Does it make sense? Of course not. Imperial bases and peaceful sceneries do not match up, especially during such times of turmoil in the galaxy. But picture that scenery with an explosion caused by a pair of infamous rebels. Now that makes sense. The foundations of the Imperial base shook as its doors suddenly blew apart. Chunks of metal flew outwards as a young woman burst through, her pink armor stained by the billowing smoke. She quickly rolled to the floor, tossing another detonator back through the door she came from as she leapt away as far as she could. A short barrage of blaster bolts followed as soon as Sabine landed, which was very quickly silenced by a second explosion coming from her detonator. Sabine groaned to herself as she pushed herself up, carefully watching for any signs of approaching danger. Over there! A stormtrooper shouted as he fired her way. The bolt scorched the dirt right next to Sabine's feet, causing her to once again leap away and duck behind some cover. Another barrage of bolts hammered against the crates Sabine hid behind, causing them to chip away dangerously. It was clear to her that she wasn't going to be able to hide behind cover for much longer, and she needed to come up with something if she didn't want to end up riddled with holes. Reaching into her pockets, Sabine pulled out yet another detonator, chucking it over her head. Grenade! One of them shouted. But it was too late. The explosion flung them the same way Sabine was thrown as she was escaping. She peeked her head over what remained of the crates, checking to see if there was anyone left alive. A single blaster bolt whizzing past her head was all the answer she needed. Don't let her escape. Another battalion rushed towards her, and Sabine was forced to duck back down behind the already disintegrating crates. Ezra! Sabine hissed into her comms. Where are you? I could really use some of your help here. No response. Ezra! Sabine nearly shouted. Hang on, Sabine, help is on the way, Ezra's calm voice called back to her. And not a moment longer, help arrived. A large shadow suddenly flew overhead, causing Sabine to lift her head and turn her attention towards the flying figure. Her eyes widened as her vision was filled with thick white fur. You brought Lone Wolves! Sabine exclaimed in surprise. The wolves tore the entire battalion apart, showing no mercy to the unfortunate stormtroopers. Told you I had a plan, Ezra's voice came from behind her. Impressed? Sabine turned back to look at him, a smile slowly creeping up on her face as she saw the proud look he had. You take after Kanan way too much. The pride on Ezra's face gave room for a small pout. The plan's not that bad, Ezra argued, bounding up towards her. So, did you get it? He asked eagerly. Sabine fished a small data chip from her pocket, flashing him a victorious smirk. Oh, you know I did. Told you I didn't need help to break in here. Ezra let out a snort. Sure, you didn't need my help distracting them, guiding you through the area, finding the location of the data chip. He started but was interrupted with a firm slap of his arm. Yeah, all right. You did help a little bit, Sabine eventually admitted. Come on, let's get out of here before your friends decide they want something besides stormtrooper armor for lunch. Underscore 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 underscore. The streets of Lothal were bustling with activity. Despite the obvious heavy Imperial presence on the planet, the local denizens pretty much lived their lives as if the Empire wasn't there. Rows and rows of stalls lined each passage of the street, making the marketplace come alive with its various interesting aspects. So, what do you think is on that disc? Ezra asked. Probably just the usual, Sabine replied as she squeezed through the crowd. Imperial plans, ship patrols and the convenient file which tells us how to disrupt all of it. Ezra let out a short chuckle. It's funny how the Empire always groups their plans with the files that have all the details we need on how to ruin said plan, he remarked, scooching closer to Sabine as a set of kids unintentionally bumped into him. Just typical Empire stuff, I guess, Sabine said, trying to ignore how close Ezra was to her. A comfortable silence lingered between the two as they continued to walk. The noise of vendors bartering and children laughing drifted between them as they kept on moving ahead of them. Do you ever think we're making a difference? Sabine suddenly asked. In the rebellion, I mean. It feels like all we're doing is just causing minor trouble for the Empire. Sometimes, I feel that way too, he replied rather quickly. The Empire is so big and so powerful that sometimes it feels like no matter how hard we hit them, they would just find a way to come back. So maybe our fight is an impossible one? Sabine asked as she glanced at him. No, Ezra replied as he shook his head. I think it only seems impossible because we're looking at the entire situation as a whole. But if you were to break it down into small pieces, I think we're actually making more progress than we thought. But are we though? Sabine questioned with a hint of doubt. Even this intel we're getting doesn't seem like it could help us that much. Like maybe everything we're doing is useless, that there's no purpose to it. Pausing for another moment, Ezra placed his arms on Sabine, turning her to face him. You're worried about something else, aren't you? He asked, reading the emotions on her face. Sabine quietly nodded. Is it your parents? Ezra continued. I know how much you're worried about them, especially since we're going to have to meet them soon. I guess so, Sabine replied, going quiet once more. Do you want to talk about it? Ezra gently urged. No one knew better than him how closed off Sabine usually was. If she didn't want to speak about her problems, then she wasn't going to. And pushing her about it was the least helpful thing anyone could ever do about it. Do you think we'll always be together? Sabine asked, surprising Ezra. Together? He repeated, causing Sabine to blush a deep crimson. I mean working together, she quickly clarified. Oh, I mean yeah. Why wouldn't we? Sabine bit her lip, trying to organize her thoughts. What if one of us has to leave? And not for just a few days, but for an extended period of time. You mean like on a mission? Ezra asked. Because you know that if Command sends either of us on a mission which takes that long, the other one will follow regardless of what they say, right? Of course, Sabine chuckled. I would expect no less from either of us. Then what's up? Ezra placed his hands on the sides of her arms. It's nothing, Sabine lied, closing herself off again. But Ezra was feeling a little bit gutsy today, and so he pushed even harder. Are you worried that your parents might not want to accept you after what you did? That's part of it, she replied. But there's more. Sabine fell silent once again, and she found herself unconsciously closing the distance between her and Ezra. And Ezra wasn't oblivious to her closeness to him. 2 years ago, the action would have made him blush like a maniac. But now, more than anything, he just wanted her to feel like herself once again. And so, without really thinking his own actions through, he pulled Sabine into his chest, engulfing her into a warm, gentle hug. Ezra. Sabine protested, trying to squirm away. He may be her best friend, but physical affection always made her feel embarrassed, especially if they were in public. Shush, Ezra consoled his friend, slowly running his fingers through her hair. You don't have to tell me if you don't feel like it. I just want you to know that whatever it is that's bothering you, whatever it is you're worried about, I'll always be here to help you through it. No matter what. But that's the thing, Sabine said, her voice muffled in his chest. What if? What if you're not here? Ezra pulled her tighter into his chest. Sabine, I'm not just going to leave you. What if I'm the one who has to leave? Sabine pulled away from the hug. What if I have to choose between you and my family? Then you choose whatever feels right, Ezra said firmly. Sabine swallowed. And if that means leaving you guys behind and staying with my family? Then you choose family. Sabine blinked, shocked by his answer. And you'll be fine with me leaving? Even if it means you will never know when I might come back? She asked, trying to restrain her anger. Sabine, I'm never fine with you leaving. Especially if I won't know when you'll be coming back, he replied, clutching her hand. But it would be even worse to see you feeling miserable. If leaving the rebellion and helping your family is what your heart is telling you to do, then I will support you all the way. Heck, I'll even fly you out there myself. But, what if something happens to you? What if I'm not there to help out, and you guys? Sabine's eyes fell to the floor. Die. Ezra finished for him. Sabine nodded. Placing his hands on her cheeks, Ezra pulled Sabine's gaze right back to him. Sabine, we're not going to die because you're not here. A small smile curled up his lips. I'm pretty sure I'm a better shot than you are, all right? Ezra. Sabine slapped his hand. I'm not kidding here. What, you don't think I can protect myself? Ezra continued. You think I'm not a strong enough Jedi? He flexed his arms ridiculously. Ezra. Stop playing around. But she was smiling throughout his ordeal. Well then maybe you should stop too. Because if I remember correctly, I was the one who won our last duel. So maybe you should try and convince me to come with you if you're going to try and rebuild your family. I think you might need the extra firepower. Sabine glared at him, but her eyes eventually softened into one of light-hearted amusement. Hey, you and me. We're unstoppable together. But that doesn't mean that we're useless when we're alone. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Sabine. You make bombs into works of art, turn even the most competent of bucketheads into useless puppets. He squeezed her shoulder. And I'm a lone rat who became a Jedi. So I think on our own, we're pretty much a force to be reckoned with. Sabine melted into his eyes, and found herself pulling Ezra into a hug this time. You'll always be there for me, no matter what? She asked. 100%. Even if you'll have to be without me for years. Maybe 95. Sabine chuckled, and slapped him fondly. With such a weight off her back, it was only then did she realize how close she was to him. But she was too in the moment to feel embarrassed about it. She just felt warm. And she didn't want to let him go, not for even a second. Mommy, look. Those two are acting the same way you and Daddy do when he comes back from work. Sabine and Ezra quickly jumped apart. It was the voice of a naive kid which ended their sweet moment. The mother quickly hushed her child, casting a knowing smile to the couple before hastily walking away from them. So? Ezra began, awkwardly rubbing the back of his head. Shall we go back? Sabine pretended to dust off her clothes, trying to act as normal as she could be. Before that, do you wanna hang out a little bit? Before we head back? Ezra proposed. Sabine's eyes immediately darted up towards him. With you? She mindlessly asked. Oh yeah, I mean who else? Of course, Sabine coughed, quickly composing herself as an impish smile made it to her face. Are you asking me on a date, Ezra? Now it was his turn to be skittish, not that he wasn't already. It doesn't have to be one, he replied, blushing. Unless you want it to be. His voice was soft, as if he didn't want it to be heard. But Sabine heard it, and it made her feel extremely giddy. Well then, what are we waiting for? She said as she locked her arms around his, dragging him off excitedly. underscore 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 underscore. Taking some time to explore the streets of Lothal, the pair eventually found and settled in at a nearby cafe. It wasn't the nicest of places to hang out, and it was definitely not what Sabine was imagining for such an occasion. But, despite its tackiness, neither couldn't find it in themselves to cease their enjoyment. Sitting at a table in the corner, the two of them ordered their drinks and spent the rest of their time chatting about the simple nothingness of their lives. Ezra mostly talked about his training, griping about how Kanan was relentless with pushing him to be the best Jedi he could ever be. While Sabine mostly talked about her paintings, specifically focusing on one which had been lingering in her mind for so long, but she was yet able to find the perfect canvas for. By the way, I have been meaning to ask, what happened to Ketsu? Ezra asked once their drinks arrived. Sabine nearly spat her drink back into her cup. Ketsu? Why are you asking about her? She asked, trying to hide her shock. Oh no, it's not me who's asking, Ezra explained. It's Wedge, he's been pestering me about her ever since she came by that day. Wedge? Sabine asked, furrowing her brows. Why would she ask about Wedge? Did you really forget? Ezra asked. Didn't you set the two of them up? Sabine's eyes went wide as she finally recalled the event. Oh Kark! She exclaimed. Wedge is still going on about her. After all this time? He never stopped, Ezra replied, befuddled. She's been the only thing on his mind ever since the day she came by. Seriously, what did you do to both of them? Nothing. I swear. Sabine insisted. Ketsu said she wanted to have a one-night stand with someone on the base. At first she suggested someone from the Spectres, but I thought that would be way too gross and awkward. So I introduced her to Wedge, she explained. What exactly did the two of them do? Apparently, more than sleeping with each other, Ezra replied, slightly disgusted at the topic. They cuddled. Now Sabine actually spat her drink back into her cup. Then they talked about their feelings with each other. Sabine had to hold back a gag. And they even made out after that. And not like the way people do in one-night stands, but the way married couples do. The way newlyweds do. Stop. Stop. Sabine begged, her face visibly disgusted. Maybe introducing them to each other was not my best idea. Tell me about it, Ezra said, taking a sip of his drink. He's been coming to me non-stop, asking me to ask you to pass her a message. What did his message say? I couldn't even get past the first line. It went something like, my love for you flows like the rivers on Endor. Ezra let out a disgusted groan. Like, does Endor even have rivers? Sabine laughed so loud that it looked like she went crazy. Now I kinda want to see how Ketsu would react to that. I really would not, Ezra chuckled. Before Sabine could come up with her own response, the two of them were distracted by some loud shouting happening at the opposite end of the cafe. From what they could see, it looked as if a young girl was being threatened by a large Trandos Han. But despite her being much smaller than him, she showed no signs of fear. Looks like we need to show those goons a thing or two about picking on someone their own size, Sabine smirked. Wanna try and teach them a lesson? She asked. But Ezra seemed to be transfixed at the sight before him. He narrowed his eyes, focusing on the unfortunate girl who was being ganged up upon. Ezra? Sabine asked again. I think I know that girl, he replied, quickly standing up and running towards her. Underscore 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 underscore. You're going to pay for what you did, girl, the Trandos Han said, harshly jabbing his finger at her. These clothes cost a fortune, and they are going to cost even more to clean up thanks to the gunk you spilled on it. I'm not paying you Griff's a single credit, the girl spat back. And I didn't spill anything on you. You were the ones who didn't watch where you were going. You calling me a liar, girl? The Trandos Han hissed. I'm calling you a filthy hack. A slimy rat that preys on others just because you can. She bit back. The Trandos hand screamed in rage, pushing everyone aside and bringing his large hand around the girl. Why, you little. He lifted her up with ease, his strength more than enough to deal with her squirming. Let me go. She protested, kicking her feet. It's kids like you that need to know who to respect. And the only way to teach them that is by giving the appropriate punishment. He brought his face closer to her. Maybe if I cut out that tongue of yours, you will know how to show more respect. For the first time, a look of fear actually crossed over her face, and she doubled her efforts to get out of his grasp. But just before things could get out of hand, a glass was suddenly flung towards the Trandos hand's head. What the? He released the girl, dropping her to the ground in a daze. Who did that? He demanded, looking around. But no one answered him. Because no one knew the answer. Another mug was then thrown again towards him, causing him to whip his head in anger as he searched for the perpetrator. But once again, he found no one. Suddenly, the Trandos hand was pushed to the ground, face planted directly onto the cafe floor. And if that wasn't enough, a bowl of food was thrown his way, spilling its contents over his head and staining his clothes in some ridiculous color. The surrounding patrons couldn't help but snicker at not only how comical he looked, but at how the situation itself developed. What are you laughing at? He shouted. But another bowl was then flung his way, this time staying stuck right at the top of his head. The rainbow-colored reptilian lost all the fear he had initially gripped the room with. Completely riddled with shame, he turned to growl at the girl one last time, cursing her with the usual "I'll remember you for this," before quickly darting out of the cafe. The crowd surrounding the girl eventually dissipated, leaving her to wonder what it was that just happened. That was strange, she remarked, looking around the room with the same curiosity as the Trandos hand before her. Ezra. She heard someone angrily hiss. Her head immediately darted towards the sound, and she found herself immediately drawn to a familiar blue head. What do you think you're doing? The same voice scolded. I'm sorry, Sabine, it's just. I know her. The aforementioned blue head turned to face her, giving her a small smile. And it was only then did the girl realize who it was. Ezra? She asked. Ezra Bridger. The one and only Ezra smiled. Not a moment after he had said that, the girl suddenly flung her arms around Ezra. Marina, I can't breathe. Ezra choked, but still hugged back nonetheless. It really is you. She exclaimed excitedly, ignoring his pleas as she hugged him tighter. Wait, what are you doing here? Did you never leave? Don't you tell me that you've been on Lothal ever since I left. She hit him with a barrage of questions as she let him go. I left ages ago actually, Ezra explained. I joined a small group when they visited Lothal. The only reason why I'm back here is because I have a mission to complete. Mission? What are you, like rebels or something? Ah. Did I say mission? Ha, what I meant was, Ezra stammered. Way to be inconspicuous, Buckethid. Sabine pushed past him, smacking the back of his head. We don't usually tell people what it is we're doing, she said, casting a glare at Ezra. Mainly because most people wouldn't hesitate to turn us in for it. Ah, gotcha, Marina whispered, understanding. So you two are workmates. Coming together on a mission. She made sure to be extra quiet for that last part. We're in the same squad, Sabine started. I mean, we're friends, she quickly corrected. I'm Sabine, Sabine Wren. Ah, Sabine. Marina replied, wrapping her arms around an already uncomfortable Sabine. I'm Marina, Marina Cry. I knew Ezra from way back. We used to play together until his parents. She trailed off, probably remembering Ezra's sad history. Sorry, she apologized, looking at Ezra. I didn't mean to bring them up. Hey, it's okay Mo, Ezra comforted, placing a hand on her shoulder. My parents may be gone, but I've found people to help me through it, he replied, glancing at Sabine. Marina smiled, pulling Ezra into yet another hug. We should catch up sometime. Are you free now? Let's hang out, you and your friend. I'd love to know what you've been up to so far. Actually, it'd probably be best if we got going, Sabine interjected, turning to look at Ezra. Hera wouldn't like it if we stayed out for too long. I'm sure Hera wouldn't be that mad if we stayed out a little longer, Ezra insisted. Come on, an hour should be just fine. Sabine wanted to protest further, but by then Ezra had already made his way back to their table with Mo. You know damn well that Hera would not like this one bit, Sabine whispered to herself before begrudgingly following behind. Underscore 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 underscore. It was a weird thing that Sabine was feeling. She was currently on her third glass of some bluish liquid, sipping on the remaining flakes stuck on the ice cubes. She made loud slurping noises as she watched Ezra and Mo happily chat the day away. She wasn't jealous, or at least that was what she told herself. But honestly at this point, who even cared what she felt? There's no way you did something so cool. Marina gushed at Ezra as she smacked his arm. You used to be so lanky, but look at you now. Hey, I guess puberty was very nice to me. Ezra flashed a confident smirk. The frown on Sabine's face only deepened as she witnessed the scene unfold before her. He had basically told her everything. From training to be a Jedi, fighting the Sith, to even being a member of the rebellion. In short, he had no tact around her. And Sabine was getting a bit annoyed at that. Raising her hand, Sabine ordered yet another glass of that mysterious blue drink. She was going to slurp the entire cafe down at this rate if Ezra chatted her up any longer. So, what are you even doing here? Ezra asked Marina, clearly oblivious to his silently fuming friend. Was Alderaan too fancy for your tastes? Something like that, Marina replied with a sheepish look. I kinda ran away from my parents. You what? Sabine basically jumped out of her seat. Do they know that you're here? They should. I left a letter behind telling them where I was going. But I don't think they'll find me so soon. Maybe, but stormtroopers may come by, and we don't want to be caught loitering around here when they show up, Sabine retorted a little too harshly. What Sabine's trying to say is that she's worried for our safety. I'm sure that any of the local troopers will notice us in a heartbeat. She's just trying to keep a lookout for us, Ezra chimed in. I understand. I guess having your job isn't the easiest thing in the Empire, Marina replied, winking at Sabine. Why did you run away? Sabine asked, letting her face soften. Marina lowered her head, going silent for a moment. Honestly, I just missed Lothal, she eventually admitted. When the Empire took away the farm, it was like watching my future disappear right in front of my eyes. All I ever wanted to do was grow up and take over for my parents after they retired. I was hoping that that dream could still come true, even though we're no longer living here. But when I went to take a look at where the farm used to be, all that remained were the factories they built on it. The only thing left of my childhood covered by pillars of smoke. Have you talked to your parents about this? Ezra asked with a soft look. They wouldn't understand, Marina replied. I don't know how they do it, but it's like they're happier there. It's like they prefer life on Alderaan, and are fine with the Empire taking what was ours in the first place. It's what they do, Sabine said with a grim nod of her head. It's why we fight, so that we can take back what they stole. And that's why I'll always respect you for it, Marina replied, turning to Sabine. By the way, you seem to be enjoying those drinks a little too much, she pointed towards the stacks of glasses in front of Sabine. What? Sabine replied confused, before realizing how many glasses she had drunk already. Well, I guess you've really taken a liking to this place. Now we have to come back here the next time we're on Lothal, Ezra said, chuckling. What? I do not like them. Sabine said with a firm glare. You say that, but... Ezra said, smirking as he pointed at the glasses again. Oh hush, Ezra, stop bothering Sabine. Now go be a gentleman and pay for our drinks, Marina said as she shooed him away. Wait, all of them? All of them? Including my large purple slushy, Marina replied again. Man, Hera's gonna kill us when she finds out how much we spent, Ezra said as he trudged on over to the counter. Once he was a safe enough distance away, Marina turned to Sabine. So, how long have you two been a thing? A thing? No. Never. We've never been together, Sabine replied, feeling a little surprised at her answer. Sure. Marina dragged out the word, looking at Sabine with sly eyes. With the daggers you were glaring at him when we talked, I almost thought you two were married. Jealous much, Sabine? I am not jealous. Sabine nearly screamed. Marina smiled mischievously back at Sabine, but decided to hold off of teasing her. All right, but at least tell me when things changed between the two of you. From one foolish girl in love to another. Arching an eyebrow at her, Sabine didn't budge at her. I think you're mistaking my apparent love for him with your own. Maybe, but that doesn't mean that yours isn't any true, Marina replied. Besides, my feelings for Ezra are a thing of the past. I could never be with him the way you can. What are you talking about? You're his childhood friend. I'm sure you know things about him that even I don't know. I do, but the person he needs in his life today isn't me. It's you, and you know it. Marina stared at Sabine with a serious look. Why? Why didn't you take him with you? Wasn't he your best friend? Sabine asked. She tried to keep her tone level, but it sounded a bit accusatory. When you left for Alderaan, couldn't you convince your parents to at least care for him? Give him a chance at a normal life. A look of pain flashed across Marina's face, but it quickly disappeared. I wanted to, Sabine, I really did. But he chose to stay here, he didn't want to leave his parents behind, Marina replied. Honestly, I'm surprised you managed to get him off Lothal. The memory of the cocky kid who tried flirting with her on their first meeting brought a small smile on Sabine's face. I guess so. Maybe it was just the right time. Or maybe it was because of a certain someone. Marina playfully eyed Sabine. Sabine glared at Marina. Oh come on, you're telling me in the amount of time you two have spent together, you guys have never been more than friends. Okay, he did flirt with me a couple of times when he first joined, Sabine admitted. But it was annoying, and childish, not really something I fancied. And what about now? Is he still annoying, childish, something you don't fancy? This time, Sabine had no reply. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Listen, Sabine, Marina continued. Ezra's a good person. And he's an even better friend, and I'm sure that whatever he will become in your future, he will also be perfect for it. Maybe for now, you'd just like to be his friend. And that's fine, but if you ever want to be something more with him, you'd better make a move. I'm pretty sure even you have begun noticing how much attention he's drawing. Sabine wanted to deny Marina's statement, but then she remembered how the past few weeks had been. I just want to spend some time with my best friend, Sabine moaned, placing her head in her hands. Why does it have to be so complicated? It really isn't, Marina replied. All you have to do is ask yourself, who do you want to be in his future? Sabine pondered the question in silence for a moment, only being interrupted when she heard Marina standing up from her seat. You're leaving? She asked. Shouldn't you at least say goodbye to Ezra first? I already did, a long time ago, Marina smiled, a seemingly quiet sad look on her face. I have no place in his life right now, but you do. You have to promise me, Sabine. Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll protect him, and be someone that he can count on. She clasped Sabine's hands tightly. I don't know if I can, Sabine began. Please, just promise me. Sabine blinked, before nodding firmly. I promise I'll do whatever it takes. Smiling, Marina eventually let go of Sabine's hands. Maybe one day, when this is all over, you guys can come and visit Alderaan. And maybe you two will come as something more than friends. Perhaps, Sabine smiled, before watching as Marina turned to leave the cafe. Underscore 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 underscore. Hey, where did Marina go? Ezra asked as he eventually came back. She said she had to go back to her parents, but she invited us to come to Alderaan after all this is over, Sabine replied as she finished sipping her drink. Oh, that sucks. I was hoping to at least say goodbye to her, Ezra pouted as he sat down beside Sabine. So, do you actually like that drink? Sabine stared at the glass in her hand, wondering the exact same question herself. You know, it's kind of growing on me. Kinda like how Marina is growing on you. Ezra asked with a smirk. I sensed the way you were glaring at me when I suggested we stay a bit longer. Was I that obvious? Sabine asked with a deadpan look. Not really. I only realized because I know you so well, Ezra replied honestly. Sabine stared back at him for a moment, unsure of how to reply. I guess you do, she said, smiling to herself. Come on, we should get going. If Hera asks why we're so late, I'm telling her you got lost. Don't do that, Sabine, Ezra pleaded as he plodded on behind her. Especially after I paid for your 4 blue calves. Hera's not going to give us any extra allowance once she finds out we blew our budget just for some colorful drinks. Don't worry, whatever it is, I'm sure we can get through it together. Marina asked me to take care of you after all. Hey, I can take care of myself just fine, thank you very much, Ezra said with a huff. What did the two of you even talk about anyways? Placing a finger to his lips, Sabine smiled cheekily at him. You should never ask a woman her secrets, she replied slowly before walking off. Ezra stood stunned at what Sabine just did. Shaking his head, he quickly ran after Sabine, heart pounding at her sudden touch to his lips. He spent the rest of the walk wondering what caused the sudden change in her personality, leading to him missing out on the wide smile plastered on Sabine's face. Underscore 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 underscore. And that's the story. This chapter not only marks the halfway point of this fanfic, but also the point where I start to use my OCs. Some of you may not know, but Marina Cry is actually a canon character. She appeared in the Rebels book Ezra's Gamble, and I decided to use her as I wanted an equal distribution of OCs and canon characters in this fic. If I had to say, I did have quite a lot of fun writing this. But if I'm being honest, the next chapter is probably my favorite, so look forward to it. Hey Hera, have you seen Sabine? Ezra asked, peeking his head into the briefing room. Not recently, no, Hera replied, tilting her head slightly to face Ezra while still keeping her attention in front of her. I think Sato assigned her to meet with some Imperial contact off-world. She's not going to be back anytime soon. Why do you ask? Crossing his arms, Ezra leaned against one of the tables. We were supposed to go scouting together. Kanan wanted us to take a look at some of the nearby areas around the base. You two have been doing a lot of things together, haven't you? Hera said with a sly smile, her attention now fully focused on Ezra. Reminds me a little bit of how Kanan and I used to be before all this trouble with the rebellion, she said, placing a hand under her chin and sighing dreamily. First of all, you, Ezra cringed. And second of all, you're the one who has been assigning the both of us on the same missions over and over again. True, but I don't remember asking Kanan to assign you and Sabine on this one, Hera smirked. Well, scouting missions are quite boring to do on my own, Ezra replied, avoiding Hera's gaze. But Hera wasn't buying any of it. Really? She asked doubtfully. And it wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that the areas Kanan wanted you to take a look at are Kryna nests. Ezra went silent for a moment, opening and closing his mouth as he tried to come up with a response. Well, he began, but Hera quickly cut him off. You're afraid of the spiders, aren't you? Don't tell Sabine, but yes. Hera shook her head in disbelief, feeling more amused at Ezra than pity. Well, if you're that against the idea of going alone, I could try and convince Kanan to put it on hold for now. Hera scratched her head. But I promised Sato that we'd be able to get that intel by today. She trailed off, hoping to come up with a possible solution. I could go with him, Hera heard someone behind her say. Both Hera and Ezra turned to look at the source of the voice. It came from one of the newer recruits, a Myri Allen girl about Ezra's age. She stood up from her seat, walking over beside Hera. It's just a bunch of spiders, right? Nothing I can't deal with, she said confidently. You do know what you're getting into, right? Hera asked, somewhat surprised by her courage. Of course, I read the reports about when you guys first found this place. Back at home, spiders like those were pretty common, she explained. They invaded our homes so frequently, that I had to personally fight them off more than a few times, just to keep my brothers safe. Aren't you from Myriel? I thought the icy world didn't have any spidery-like creatures. Hera questioned. But the young woman only smiled. My family mostly traveled, she began. Met quite a few of those types on Kashyyyk and Utapau. Ezra arched her eyebrow at the Myri Allen rebel, very vaguely recognizing her. Besides Hera, most of the members of the Spectres didn't really have the opportunity to interact with any of the newer recruits. So for Ezra, this was his first time even talking to her. What did you say your name was again? He asked. She turned to look at Ezra, looking as if she was putting on her sweetest smile. You can call me Kira, she replied. Well, Kira, I'm not sure the spiders you met before in the past really hold up to the Kriner, Ezra explained. These ones are blaster resistant, and I can't really use the force to stop them or anything. I'm not too worried. Sure, it won't be easy. All the more reason you need someone capable with a blaster to watch your back, Kira countered. I guess, but I'm just worried I won't be able to keep you safe. Just because I'm not Mandalorian doesn't mean I can't take care of myself, Kira said with a pointed huff. Besides, I've dealt with giant spiders before, I can deal with them again. Wasn't Hera briefing you for something? Ezra countered, clearly not as enthusiastic as Kira was about her joining the mission. I'm sure she wouldn't appreciate you leaving right in the middle of it. Actually, Hera said with a smile. I think it might be better if she went with you. I really need some intel in that area, and it would help to keep us in Sato's good graces. Kira turned to flash Hera a grateful look, although Hera seemed to be in it more for Ezra's amusing reactions. Well then, that's settled. When are we leaving? With his opinions outnumbered, Ezra slumped his shoulders in resignation. All right, I guess you're coming with, he said with a tired sigh. Come on then. The sooner we get this done, the sooner I'll get to wash myself of those spiders. Hera watched with a smirk as Kira happily trotted over to Ezra's side. It wasn't going to take a genius to figure out why she was so eager to volunteer for this assignment. And while it wasn't really fair to put Sabine on the back foot in this particular case, at the very least, Hera was confident that Sabine's reaction to the situation was going to be just as entertaining as Ezra's. Underscore 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 underscore. With a weary sigh and a tired slump in her shoulders, the young Mandalorian known as Sabine Wren trudged her way right through the entrance of the Ghost. She fell right into the seat of the dining room chair, melting in its comforting embrace as the oh-so-matronly Hera Syndulla watched from beside her, a bemused smile on her face. Rough mission. She chuckled as she wrote her report. That's an understatement, Sabine replied through a tired groan. Why is it that every time Sato sends me out to meet an Imperial spy, he always picks out the most incompetent and useless ones for me to meet? It's like they're not even trying to give us good intel. Well, I guess it hasn't been easy for us to find good replacements ever since we shut down the Fulcrum program, Hera said, smiling sympathetically as she turned to face Sabine. So I take it that this spy of ours did not have any reliable intel? Not even a little bit, Sabine groaned. Honestly, I don't get why I'm the only one who gets these kinds of solo missions. Ezra gets the go on small extraction missions. Why can't I get the cooler missions? We should just pass off the responsibility of meeting inept spies to the new recruits. Give them something else to do besides scouting for a change. We do need experienced people for tasks like those, Hera replied. Besides, we wouldn't want to scare off our new recruits with troublesome jobs like these now, would we? I guess not, Sabine stretched, before pushing herself off the chair. Well, guess I better go and find Ezra. He practically begged me to go with him to check out some Kriner nests. If that's not an indication of how much he's afraid of those spiders, I don't know what is. So you do know about his fear with those spiders? Hera repeated, feeling somewhat surprised. Sabine shrugged. Well, yeah, he's not exactly subtle with it. Speaking of which, where is he? I thought he would be around here waiting for me. Oh, he's already left, Hera replied, trying to remain as nonchalant as possible. He found someone else to go with him. Who? Sabine jerked her head back to Hera. Kanan. Hera shook her head. No, not Kanan. Kira. One of the new recruits I was briefing today. Sabine furrowed her brows, trying to remember who it was. The Myri Allen. Yap. They left not too long ago on one of the bikes. The gears in Sabine's mind were slowly turning, and the look which was beginning to form on her face was definitely the form of quality entertainment Hera had expected to see. Well, it's great. Sabine chuckled nervously. Ezra's making new friends, that's good for him. Really? Good for him? Hera asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, real good. Sabine trailed off. Well, since he's already gone on the mission, guess I can just get some rest. But before that, I was wondering, which way did they go? A teasing smirk slowly curled up to Hera's lips. Well, I'm sure if I look for a bit, I might be able to find their coordinates. Sabine's face lifted in joy. Perfect. She basically shouted. But, I don't think I have the time for that, Hera continued. Her face immediately fell. Unless you're able to make it worth my while. A sly smirk formed on Hera's lips. Sabine narrowed her eyes, realizing that if she was going to get what she wanted, she was going to have to play along with Hera's games. Fine, I'll take your next 3 patrol shifts. That enough to make it worth your while? Make it 4. Done. And, you're in charge of doing maintenance for the Ghost and the Phoenix for the next month. The Ghost and the Phoenix? Sabine exclaimed in disbelief. Me and Kanan haven't been able to get much quality time together lately, Hera mused. Not having to think about maintenance will do wonders for our relationship. Surely you wouldn't mind helping me out with that now, would you? Sabine's eyes twitched in annoyance. You know, I have a jetpack. Combine that with a speeder, and I'd probably be able to find them myself pretty quickly, she replied, tapping her chin in a vain attempt to recover some control in this little game. But Hera wasn't going to let herself be done in so easily. Oh look, they just asked for some overtime. They really didn't. Looks like they will be spending the night together in some cave. They really weren't. All right, give me those coordinates, Sabine quickly decided. Only Hera wins at Hera's games. Underscore 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 underscore. Ever wondered what a group of Kryners were called? There was probably some sort of vocabularial term to call a large gathering of them. But given Ezra's fear for those multiple-legged creatures, the thought of it wasn't something which often lingered in his mind. Unfortunately for him, the naming conventions of a group of spiders was not a topic of conversation he could avoid. As for some reason, it seemed to be the only thing the person next to him wanted to talk about. A herd. Maybe. Ezra suggested. A herd of spiders sounds right to me. Kira laughed and smacked his shoulder. What, like cows? I mean, it's not that far-fetched of an idea now, is it? Ezra defended with an amused smirk. We call a lot of cows a herd of cows, so we should call a lot of spiders a herd of spiders. I'm no galactic linguist, but don't they use herds to group animals which are being bred for some reason? Like for their milk or something? Kira replied. I don't know about you, but I don't see anyone milking those spiders, she said, making mechanical milking motions with her hands. An image of a Kryner spider with udders flashed in Ezra's mind. Please don't do that, he cringed. I do not want to even imagine how a bunch of farmers would milk those creatures. Hey, don't kick it till you try it, Tilda, she nudged his ribs playfully. But I guess milking spiders is just a thing of the future, Kira said, flicking her leku as she cast a sidelong glance towards Ezra. Your future maybe, I don't want to live on any planet which has a business in milking spiders. Your loss, Bridger. Just don't come crying to me when I hit the massive gold mine that is the spider milking operation. Thankfully for Ezra, the topic of spiders and how one were to milk them died down as they approached the next Kryner nest. They were on their 5th nest for the day, and from the way it looked, it seemed to be the biggest one of them all. Originally, Kanan had requested to have only a single nest checked out, as he knew quite well how disgusted Ezra was by them, and didn't want to push his apprentice too much. But when Kira very excitedly suggested that they should also check out the rest of the nearby nests, Ezra couldn't really find it in himself to say no to her sparkling personality. As Ezra scouted the nest from the small hill, he felt Kira slowly nestle close beside him, gently brushing against his body as she did so. She had been quite touchy with him during this assignment, slapping his arm here and there, jabbing a finger against his sides, and sometimes even patting his head. Ezra didn't really mind all the extra physical contact, chalking it up to some weird Mary Allen culture thing. But he did find it weird that her emotions seemed to be at its most excited when he was nearest to her. "See anything interesting?" Kira whispered into his ear. Ezra shivered as her breath tickled his ear, seemingly enjoying the new sensation. "Not much yet, what about you?" he asked. Kira only shook her head. The spiders roamed creepily around the entrance of the nest, clicking their teeth as they scouted nearby. Unlike the previous nests they visited, this one seemed to be much more heavily guarded. It was like there was a small army guarding the entrance, protecting something inside. In all likelihood, the queen of their entire species probably lived in that cave, and it was starting to cause Ezra to feel a little bit worried, given that there was probably even more spiders inside the cave. "I think we need to get out of here," Ezra said with a light tremor. "Wouldn't want to be caught dead here if they spotted us." Kira nodded her head. "Yeah, those things give me the creeps," she said as she stood up. "I thought you said you wanted to milk them." "Well, obviously, I won't be the one milking. I would hire some farmers and have them do the milking for Woe." Kira cried out as her leg was caught between some rocks. The momentum of her standing up caused her to fall over the edge, rolling right off the cliff and directly into the horde of spiders below. "Kira!" Ezra called out as he heard her scream. The spiders had all turned to face her, attracted by the sounds of her scream, and Ezra's concern for the Mary Allen. Thankfully for Kira, the hill wasn't too steep. She had landed as safely as she could have without suffering any major injuries. But while she was able to stand up perfectly fine, the more concerning fact was the eyes of the many many-legged creatures now staring right at her. Not wasting a single moment, Kira quickly grabbed her blaster and fired off as many shots as she could, hoping to keep them off of her. Some of the spiders recoiled in pain and collapsed when the bolts struck them. But for most of them, it only served to further anger them. "Ezra!" Kira called out, begging for him to help her. But she heard no response. Taking a moment from the encroaching spiders, she glanced above her, but to her dismay, she saw that Ezra wasn't there. "Ezra!" She called out again desperately, before being forced to return her attention back to the spiders. Eventually Kira's barrage of shots weren't enough to keep the spiders at bay. One of them suddenly bolted towards her, swiping its legs at her and knocking the blaster out of her hand. There were too many of them. Blaster or no blaster, there was no way she was going to be able to hold them off. "Ezra!" she pleaded again helplessly. Closing her eyes, she wondered if he had left her. She knew how he felt about these spiders, so it would make sense for him to lose a little bit of his courage in this situation. But the moment those worries reached her mind, she heard the sound of an igniting lightsaber coming from above. Opening her eyes, Kira saw as Ezra very heroically leapt down in front of her, placing himself right in the sights of the spiders. He waved his lightsaber, slicing through some of them who got too close. When the rest of the herd moved closer, Ezra closed his eyes and shot his arms out, sending out a heavy wave of the force and knocking down any of the approaching spiders. Sheathing his lightsaber, Ezra grabbed Kira in his hands, placing his hands under her legs and shoulders. "Hold on!" he cried out as she pushed her head into his chest. Bending his own legs down, Ezra sprung up back to the top of the hill, bringing both he and Kira out of danger. Finding a safe spot behind a rock, Ezra gently placed Kira down, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Kira shook for a moment, and Ezra panicked, worrying that maybe she was scratched somewhere. But instead she leapt forwards, pushing Ezra down as she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. "That was horrifying," Kira said between sobs. She dried her tears on Ezra's shoulders, leaving wet stains behind. While Kira was a sobbing mess, Ezra was as frozen as a statue. His arms hovered just above her back, unsure of what to do with them. Sensing the unstable emotions that were coming off of her in waves, Ezra gradually brought them down, soothingly running his hands across her back. "You're safe, all right?" Ezra whispered kindly. "I got you, don't worry." The two stayed like that for a while. Kira still needing some time to calm herself, and Ezra very kindly offering to comfort her. When they finally broke apart, Ezra flashed a warm smile towards her. But as her eyes rose to meet his, he could sense something changing between them. She brought her arms away from his back, bringing a single one to his face. Her lithe fingers softly caressed his cheeks, as her brown eyes stared into his blue ones. Ezra felt his breath catch as his mind went blank. The way she was touching him was so gentle, so careful. Yet it didn't feel as if she was treating him like some fragile object. Rather, her intentions were more tender. More affectionate. As if she was suddenly overcome by some emotion, Kira slowly leaned in towards Ezra, only stopping herself when she felt his breath on her lips. Her lips parted, and the words which came out of them would be one which Ezra would remember for the rest of his life. "Can I kiss you?" Underscore 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 underscore. Sabine rode her speeder as fast as she could through the empty plains of Atoyan. She had one eye on the road ahead, and another on the device on her wrist. Thankfully, Kira's idea of coordinates were literal trackers that she for some reason had on the two of them. While Sabine would have loved to ask why Kira had trackers installed on her best friend and the new recruit, and why she was only finding out about this now, Sabine had more important things to think about. Stopping just around the corner from the two dots on her device, Sabine quietly parked her bike and carefully approached them as she tried to ignore the creeping questions invading her head. Why were the dots not moving anymore? Why were they staying still right outside a Kryna nest? What were they doing alone together so far from the base? Was it something indecent? Sabine at least hoped not. Hiding behind a pillar of rock, Sabine slowly peeked her head around, and she felt her eyes widen as she saw what unfolded before her. Underscore 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 underscore. "I'm sorry," Ezra managed to voice out. The skin on Kira's face turned a few shades darker as embarrassment flooded her face. But she kept her eyes on Ezra, determined to see this through. "You're really going to make me ask again?" she said with a shy smile. "No. I mean, you want to kiss me?" Ezra asked as if he wanted to make sure. Kira nodded. "I just wanted to thank my savior." Relief flooded back into Ezra's mind. "So, it's not a feelings thing then?" he asked. "Every kiss has some emotion behind them," Kira responded, still gazing into his eyes. "And I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some emotion behind the kiss I want to give you." Fireworks went off in Ezra's mind. Never in his life had someone thought of him this way, let alone a girl. He could see Kira slowly leaning closer to him, and almost unconsciously, Ezra pulled away. "Is something wrong?" Kira asked. "No. Nothing's wrong. I'm just thinking," Ezra said nervously. "About me, I hope." Ezra rubbed the back of his head, unsure of how to reply. "Or is it about someone else?" Kira questioned with a small smile. "Is it about Sabine?" The image of her face flashed in her mind, and for some reason, it lingered. I think so," Ezra hesitantly replied. With a disappointed frown, Kira eventually let him go, much to Ezra's relief. "So you two are a thing?" Kira guessed, but Ezra only grew even more flustered. "No. I mean, no, we aren't," he quickly replied. Kira let a laugh escape her lips, her legs swaying as she snickered. "I want to believe you, Ezra, I really do. But you're a terrible liar, you know that." "No, we really aren't together," Ezra repeated again. Kira shook her head dismissively, gently touching Ezra's hands for a moment. "It's okay. I find it sweet that you're trying to cheer me up. Especially since you're the one who broke my heart," Kira said with a hand to her chest. I'm really sorry about that. Ezra hung his head low, feeling a little guilty. It's alright, Ezra, I understand, Kira said with a smile. Hey, I'm gonna head on back on my own, alright? Ezra quickly raised his head. Don't you want me to come with? He asked, a little worried. Such the gentleman, Kira said with a smile. But I think I want some time to myself, especially after your rejection, she said with a wave of her hand. It was nice having a crush on you, Ezra Bridger, don't be a stranger, alright? Kira shouted before running off. Wait, a crush? If Ezra was any redder, he'd probably explode. Underscore 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 underscore. Sabine let a sigh of relief escape her lips. Looks like that Kira girl wasn't able to seal the deal. However, in her moment of relaxation, Sabine didn't notice Kira running straight at her. The two bumped heads as Kira turned around a corner, eliciting a small shout of pain. Ow! Wait, Sabine. What are you doing here? Kira asked as she rubbed her head. Hi, Sabine replied awkwardly. Kira's eyes glanced suspiciously at Sabine, before finally clicking as she saw the device in her hand. You were spying on us, weren't you? She asked a little too excitedly. No. I was doing something else, Sabine defended weakly, trying to look around for something to justify her being there. Well, since you're busy with something else, Kira said, eyes dropping to Sabine's belt. Her hand suddenly darted below, snatching Sabine's keys away from her and breaking out into an all-out sprint for the bike. I'm gonna take this bike and head right back to base. Have some fun with Ezra. She called out before speeding off. Wait. Sabine cried out, but to no avail. Kira had already sped off. And as if things couldn't get more awkward, Ezra suddenly came from behind her. Wait, Sabine. What are you doing here? He asked, repeating Kira's question. Sabine tried her best not to roll her eyes at the comical situation. Hey. Ezra. Fancy seeing you here. Funny story. The feeling of love is such a beautiful emotion. It is an emotion which unites two separate individuals, coming from two distinct backgrounds. They grow, and become completely unique in their own ways, yet somehow still managing to remain the same towards each other. Finding common ground between themselves where others could not. In short, it is an indescribable emotion. Watching two people whom you do not know slowly fall into each other is satisfying in its own way, and a sort of cure for any negativity one is feeling. But while it can be the literal representation of beauty, it can also be an uncomfortable representation of teenage angst. Take, for example, the case of the poor boy known as Wedge Antilles, who is currently chasing after Sabine Wren, not in the hopes of courting her, but in the hopes that he can get more information on his one-time love, Ketsu Onio. Come on, Sabine. Aren't you going to that party on Mandalore? Can't you just pass her a message for me? Please? Wedge pleaded as he bounded over helplessly to Sabine. No, I am not going to Mandalore, I am going to Crownist, my home. And we are not going to a party, we are going to rescue my father. Sabine narrowed her eyes dangerously at Wedge. Ketsu's not even gonna be there. She's got like 1,000 eyes on her, and is on the run from like every single person in the galaxy. But still, isn't she your friend? I'm sure you could use some of your Mandalorian contacts to pass the message around. Wedge flapped the paper around, hoping to catch her attention. Are you telling me to pass a stupid love letter to my parents, and ask them to help pass it around to other Mandalorian clan leaders? Sabine asked with a glare. Is that a bad thing? Wedge replied with a hopeful smile. Shaking her head, Sabine let out a heavy sigh. Wedge, I'm gonna be honest with you. Whatever it was that Ketsu told you that night, you should probably forget it. She doesn't want the kind of relationship you're dreaming of. She was just looking for someone to blow off steam, and I'm sorry I pushed her towards you, Sabine explained in the hopes of shutting down his affections. However, it seemed to only strengthen it. Maybe that was how you saw her that day, Sabine, but not me, Wedge replied firmly. She was vulnerable, and she told me things which she wouldn't just tell anyone. I'm not going to just give up on her, no matter what you try and tell me. For a moment, Sabine felt as if Wedge's confidence outshone her doubts. But then she remembered that this was Ketsu they were talking about. Okay, you know what? Fine, Sabine said exasperatedly. She took out a piece of paper and hastily scribbled down some names and information on it. Here, these are the details of Ketsu's family and her clan. If you can somehow find them, maybe you can tell her yourself, Sabine said as she handed him the piece of paper. With wide eyes, Wedge grabbed the paper with both hands. This is great, Sabine. Thanks. And one more thing, Sabine said as she pulled Wedge back to face her. This didn't come from me, got it? You won't like what happens to you if someone found out where you got this information from, she stated, trying to sound as threatening as possible. Got it, Wedge nodded before quickly running off to God knows where. So, Wedge and Ketsu are still a thing, huh? Ezra asked with a confused look. Please, Sabine said, rubbing her eyes. I wish it were that simple. Underscore 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 underscore. Saving the patriarch of an entire clan was no small feat. It was not just any simple glorious action, but one which demanded for celebrations to be had. And said celebration was only made even more grander by the fact that a Jedi, an outsider to the clan and their oldest enemy, was the person who performed said daring rescue. And with that fact in mind, there wasn't a single thing which could halt the Mandalorian party train in its tracks. Ezra wasn't even given the time to think about what was happening before he was suddenly hoisted up by Tristan and his many clanmates, who very happily began chanting his name as they paraded him around the camp for Sabine's entire family to see. That's a touch excessive, don't you think? Ursa commented to her husband. Ulrich chuckled, placing a hand on his wife's shoulders. Can you blame them? We destroyed a weapon which threatened our entire existence. And in doing so, we managed to claim our first victory against the Empire. Ulrich smiled warmly. If that doesn't ask for excessive celebrations, I'm not sure what does. Guess I'm just feeling a little sorry for that Jedi boy. Ursa leaned into her husband's touch, placing her hand on his. I hope he isn't feeling too bothered by all this. He seems to be enjoying it, Ulrich noted. Yes, but perhaps a little bit too much, Ursa replied. She narrowed her eyes at the boy, pondering on his presence for a moment. What do you think of him? The boy? Ulrich asked. Ursa nodded. He seems to be a great friend for Sabine, Ulrich replied without hesitation. But more importantly, he seems to be a good person, and a good Jedi. A soft smile slowly crept up his lips as he watched Tristan approach the young man. His generation will be the ones who will lead us to victory, doing what we could never do, achieving what we never could. And it will be people like him who will be at the forefront of everything. Victory against the Empire. It sounds like you're getting ahead of yourself, Ursa light-heartedly scolded, holding her husband's hands fondly. But I guess you were always the hopeful one between the two of us. She leaned her head into his touch. That's probably why you can't keep me away, Ulrich smiled. Returning the smile, Ursa repositioned herself so they were staring right at each other. Neither would I want to, my love, she said as she leaned in closer. Mind getting a room, you two? Sabine suddenly appeared from behind, surprising both her parents with a disgusted groan. Sabine. Ulrich quickly responded, placing himself in front of Sabine and giving Ursa the time to compose herself. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be celebrating with your friend? He pointed towards the ever-growing crowd around Ezra. Ezra celebrates enough for the both of us, Sabine replied, looking soft. Besides, I haven't seen you for so long. I just wanted to talk to you, to both of you. My mom and my dad. Ulrich's and Ursa's faces both softened, with the latter no longer concerned with looking proper. Taking a step away from her husband, Ursa placed herself right in front of Sabine's vision, looking her daughter in the eyes as she tried to form her thoughts. Sabine, I just wanted to make it clear, if I didn't before, but, I'm sorry for the way we treated you, the way I treated you, Ursa said, finally getting the words out. I always wanted to do what was best for you, even if it meant chasing you away. But I never saw you for the way you wanted to be seen, and I never tried to be the mother you needed. I hope that this time, you can give me the chance to not only do better, but to also be the mother you deserved. Words couldn't express how Sabine felt in the moment. At first, she instinctively tried to hide her face, too accustomed to not letting her emotional side show. But then she realized that these were her parents. Her mom and dad, the most important people in her life. Years of being separated from them had culminated into a concentrated feeling of fear. Fear that she would never be a part of her own family again. But now, with her father rescued and the future of her clan seemingly brighter than ever, she was finally given a chance to have her family back. And she was damned if she was going to let her pride stop her from taking it. Immediately, she wrapped her arms around her mother, pulling her tight, and holding her close. You never needed to say the words, Mother, Sabine whispered. You mean so much to me, and I know how much family means to you. Sabine. Ursa whispered, before returning the hug. A family was reunited, and a mother and daughter finally reconciled. Well, since we are riding such a large wave of good news, perhaps it is high time for me to also reveal my share of good news. Ulrich loudly announced, placing his hands on both women's shoulders. Please tell me that this good news is you not keeping that beard, Ursa joked. Oh no, it is something much more grander. What, is Tristan getting married? Sabine laughed. Oh, not Tristan, my dear daughter. You are. Sabine's laugh was immediately cut off, her lips opening and closing as if she was struggling to comprehend what she had just heard. To the Bridger boy, if I might add, Ulrich continued, only to be instantly chastised by his wife. Ulrich. Ursa scolded, her voice a low dangerous tone. Not here. At least someone here has logical thinking, Sabine thought. She was keeping it a secret. It was not your place to reveal that. Ursa added, and Sabine's face immediately fell lower. Oh dear, Ulrich covered his mouth, realizing his mistake. I am so sorry, Sabine, I did not know. It's not a secret. Sabine blurted out, ears flaring red. Oh, so your rebel friends know all about it too? Ursa replied. No. I mean, we're not a thing. But the Bridger boy, he said he was with you. Ulrich continued, still confused. What Sabine felt was nothing short of embarrassment. She covered her face with her hands, feeling the warmth in her cheeks exploding. We're not, he's not. Sabine mumbled, unable to form coherent sentences. I believe what Sabine is trying to say is that we have severely misunderstood their relationship. Ursa thankfully helped clear out their situation. Perhaps we have judged the friendship between the two of you a little too hastily, Sabine. Calming down, Sabine eventually found it in herself to face her parents. It's all right, Mother. But that doesn't mean I don't approve of you being together, Ursa added with a sly smirk. Mother. Sabine exclaimed. He's perfect for you, Sabine. Don't wait too long, you might lose him to some whore. Remember what I taught you, if the opportunity presents itself, don't ever hesitate to seize it and bed high. Mom. So you and Ezra are not in a relationship? Ulrich questioned, a little bit late on the uptake. It's complicated, Sabine replied after a moment of silence. Well, it sure looks like it is, Ulrich continued, judging the look on his daughter's face. And from the looks that Ezra is getting from that crowd, I would say that it's going to get much more complicated. Sabine raised an eyebrow at that before darting her head towards where Ezra had been carried to. And after witnessing the sight unfold before her, she did not even hesitate to rush over to his side. Underscore 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 underscore. Come on, drink up, Tristan urged, handing Ezra a cup of some unknown brown liquid. What is this? Ezra asked, swirling the cup in his hand. It's water, Tristan replied, taking a swig of his own before grimacing slightly. Just water, he repeated, voice a bit strained. Right, and Mandalorian water is supposed to be this, murky. Hey, that's not a nice way of describing it, Tristan said as he poured himself another cup. Trust me, it's nice, he insisted again, gulping the content of the cup once more. You know, I don't think Sabine would appreciate it if I got drunk around her family, Ezra argued, placing the drink back on the table. You seem to care a lot about what Sabine thinks about you, Tristan noted, eyeing Ezra knowingly. Anything happening between the two of you that I should know about? Anything like what? You know. Private stuff. Tristan explained awkwardly. Ezra's eyes widened as he finally got the meaning. Oh no, we're not like that, he insisted. Right, could have fooled me with the way you two acted around each other. Didn't she use your lightsaber to take out Saxon? Well yeah, I mean I lent that to her so that she could protect your mom, and then protect herself, Ezra explained. Why wouldn't I give it to her? Well, I mean. Tristan began, but eventually stopped and laughed to himself. You really have no idea what I'm talking about? He asked, chuckling. I guess, to a certain degree I do, Ezra admitted, sighing to himself. It's complicated. If it's about my sister, I would expect no less, Tristan replied, patting Ezra on the back. But you might want to try and uncomplicate things between yourselves. Sabine's the heiress to the clan, and there are no shortage of suitors who would love to have their place beside her. Mandalorians really do believe in those things, huh? Of course we do, only a Wren can lead the Wrens. But that doesn't mean people like my father don't get any power in the clan, Tristan explained. But it's not like Dad married Mom because he wanted a powerful position. He married her because he actually loves her, the same way that you love Sabine. Whoa, maybe love is a little bit too much for now, Ezra replied, causing Tristan to shake his head. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Bridger. But keep in mind, Sabine might not have the opportunity to wait forever. He glanced behind Ezra. And from the way I've seen some of the Mandalorians looking at you, I could say the same goes for you too. What do you mean? Ezra asked, turning his head to the direction Tristan pointed him in. He was immediately met with the faces of several young Mandalorian women looking his way, flashing him suggestive looks, and doing their best in an attempt to lure him their way. Strength is a rather sought-after trait amongst Mandalorians. I think you'll find that it is quite easy for you to find a place in our clan, especially after rescuing my father. Oh Force no, Ezra stood up panickedly. No offense, but I do not want to join your clan for now, or in the foreseeable future. You sure? With your relationship with Sabine? For the 100th time, there's no relationship between me and Sabine. Maybe for now, Tristan replied. But you might want to keep your options open. It's very rare for Mandalorians of Sabine's status to be able to choose a suitor which she very much cares for. And she really does care for you. Besides, the ambiguity of your relationship could be used to benefit the both of you. Especially in driving away any unwanted peoples. Unwanted peoples? Like what? Ezra wondered. Before Tristan could even reply, a loud voice shouted at the two of them from afar. Jedi. The voice boomed. Tristan's eyes widened at the sound. Well, there's one of them. There wasn't even time for Ezra to turn his head. The source of the loud voice was already upon him, and he was suddenly being forced to look at her. Hi, Ezra greeted as friendly as possible. The hulking figure stared at him up and down, the faint look of drunkenness in her eyes. You are the Jedi who rescued the Clan Wren's patriarch? She asked. Well, it wasn't just me. There was also Kanan, my master, Tristan and his mother, and I guess Sabine as well. Sabine? She repeated, narrowing her eyes. What's she doing back here? To help her family. The woman chortled loudly, swaying unsteadily as her chest heaved with laughter. She was the reason why the Countess's husband was put in prison in the first place. And now she wants to fix her own mistake and rejoin the clan. What a load of bull. Frowning to himself, Ezra had to hold himself back from berating the woman in front of him. There were about 1,000 things he would like to hit her with for speaking about Sabine that way. But for the time being, he was on unfamiliar grounds. And he couldn't simply act the way he wanted to. I think you're drunk, and not thinking straight, Ezra replied. Maybe you should get some rest. He stood up, gently pushing her away. But the woman placed both her arms firmly on Ezra's shoulders, keeping him in place as he leaned in closer to him. My name is Maeve. firstborn daughter of Clan Ordo, and of House Vizsla. And I declare you, Jedi Ezra Bridger, as my mate for life. Her words were beginning to slur together. So much so that Ezra had trouble telling each phrase apart. But he could very much sense the desire in her eyes. A desire that was unfortunately not blocked out by her inebriation with alcohol. Okay, now I think you really need to get some rest. Ezra struggled to get out of her grasp, but she held on as tightly as ever. Not until you've kissed me goodnight, Maeve replied, leaning in ever closer. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, Ezra found himself desperate for a way out. He struggled frantically, shaking his head and trying to pull back as far away as possible. But when all hope seemed lost, a shining light appeared to save Ezra. It was a voice, a very familiar voice, one which he was extremely grateful to hear. You get your hands off him. Sabine suddenly appeared, wrestling Ezra away from Maeve with strength neither of them knew she had. Sabine. Maeve glowered, realizing that her prey had escaped from her grasp. Do not attempt to interrupt the moment between me and my husband. Husband? Ezra sputtered, retreating further into Sabine's grasp. He's not your husband. Sabine narrowed her eyes. And he never will be. So you have claimed him as your mate? Sabine loosened her grip. What? No. We're not, Ezra and I. Then he is free for me to claim, Maeve reasoned, pulling Ezra right back into her arms. As per Mandalorian law, any warrior is free to stake her claim on an outsider, as long as there is no initial claim laid upon said outsider. That's you're pulling from a practice 1,000 years old. One which we have not abolished. So if you wouldn't mind. Maeve shoved Sabine out of the way, returning her attention back to Ezra. I would like to consummate our marriage. Sabine now joined in on Ezra's frantic movements, trying to free the poor boy from the grasp of this clearly delusional woman. Well, if we were to adhere to those practices, Tristan suddenly spoke up, catching both of their attention. Even if there was no initial claim laid on Ezra, Sabine could challenge to be the only one worthy to ask for Ezra's hand. What? Sabine exclaimed. I'm not going to do that. Then kindly step aside, Maeve rebutted once more. Sabine darted her head rapidly between Ezra and Tristan. One of the two boys was clearly asking for her help, while the other was simply enjoying it as the situation unfolded. I challenge Maeve Ordo, for the right to be the only one to ask for the Jedi's hand. Sabine finally announced, silencing the crowd, and thankfully stopping Maeve. You dare! Maeve shouted, tossing Ezra aside. Sabine unclipped her armor, letting the heavy Beskar fall to the ground. Scared? Maeve seemed to smirk, before following suit. I have been dreaming of this day ever since you left the clan. It's time to show you what we do to traitors like you. Show me what you got, Sabine replied in a ready stance. Despite the obvious theatrics in their actions, what happened next could probably be described by many to be rather anticlimactic. Maeve rushed towards Sabine, clearly intending to be the one to strike first. But unfortunately for her, it would seem that the alcohol had finally caught up. She was only able to throw a single punch, which not only missed Sabine completely, but also caused her to tumble onto the floor, knocking her out the instant her head landed on the ground. Somewhat in a shock at how the fight ended, Sabine carefully prodded her opponent with her feet. Maeve? She asked. But she was sound asleep. Groggy sounds of guttural snores were her only reply. Thinking fast, Tristan quickly stepped over the collapsed warrior, and raised Sabine's arm high. My sister, Sabine Wren, has won the right to wed the Jedi Ezra Bridger. As there is no one left to challenge her, she is the only one worthy to be the bride of Ezra. Tristan. Sabine protested. But anything she had to say was immediately drowned out by the screaming cheers of her fellow Mandalorians. Not giving her the chance to say anything else, Tristan pushed the two of them together, riling up the crowds even further. So, I guess we're married now, huh? Ezra chuckled. Stop laughing. Sabine chided as she slapped his arm. There's no way I'm getting married because of something like this. A cheeky smile crept up Ezra's lips. That wasn't a no. You're impossible, Sabine laughed, before being dragged off by Ezra to join in on the celebrations. underscore 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 underscore. In an isolated corner of the galaxy, on the edges of the outer rim, there was a quiet homely bar, sat just on the outskirts of an unnamed valley. A lonely figure quietly sat in said bar, silently sipping her drink as she minded her own business. The figure wasn't simply doing nothing. She had a small piece of paper in her hand, a simple letter which she was hesitating to read through. Carefully flipping it open, she eventually read through its contents, albeit a little slowly, as if she was afraid that the intensity of her emotions might burn through the paper. Her fear wasn't necessarily unfounded. The words which were contained by the letter weren't just any old words. They were filled with emotions, raw emotions. But the meaning behind those words wasn't what made it so special. No. Rather it was the person behind the letter, the person who sent it, which gave the words so much meaning. I hope you liked reading what I sent. Another figure appeared, eyes focusing on her as he plopped down into the seat right next to her. You shouldn't have come here, she whispered, quickly hiding behind her emotionless facade. I have a life I need to lead, and so do you. The man chuckled, ordering a drink of his own. That doesn't mean we should just cast the love away. I never said I loved you, the woman snapped, trying to sound bitter, but her tone came out more regretful than she would have liked. You didn't have to, he replied, scooting closer to her. I knew I loved you ever since Sabine introduced you to me. You're my everything, Ketsu, and I'm not going to stop chasing after you, no matter what you say. Turning her body completely to face him, the woman finally decided to let her facade drop. Oh wedge, she moaned, collapsing into his arms as the two of them fell into a sweet, yet unexpected bliss. Ezra was finally hers. Ezra was finally hers. Tell me again why we're here, Sabine asked, kicking the ground as she turned to look at Asuka. We're nowhere near the coordinates your contact gave us, and there's no way we're going to find Ezra here. The older Togruta let an amused smile form on her face. There's something we need to do here first, she replied mystically. Just the usual business for us. Please don't tell me it's the Force, Sabine said with a roll of her eyes. But Asuka merely smiled, giving Sabine the same knowing look she had given her throughout their journey. Letting out another groan in frustration, Sabine muttered something to herself before begrudgingly relenting to the more magical ways of the all-knowing Force. You think maybe we shouldn't trust the Force so much next time? Sabine grumbled, falling in step beside Asuka. All we've managed to do so far is jump from planet to planet, and we're still no closer to finding Ezra than we were 10 years ago. We have made some progress, Asuka calmly insisted. What progress? Sabine nearly snapped. 5 years, Asuka. I waited 5 years for you to come and tell me that it's time to bring him home. And then I wasted another 10 years following you around to Force knows where. And now, you're purposely taking us away from where we're supposed to be going, all because you said you were feeling something. You need to be patient, Sabine, Asuka replied, dropping her jovial tone. Everything we've done so far is for a reason. Then tell me what those reasons are. Sabine spat. 15 years of my life was wasted without Ezra, I deserve answers. Sabine's anger rode off her in droves. And Asuka, the seasoned Jedi she was, felt all of it. Yet, her posture never changed. Her calm demeanor remained all the same as she took all the irritation her companion was sending towards her. Why do you think our time was wasted? Asuka questioned, turning to Sabine. Because we haven't found him, Sabine stated simply. Because after all we've done, and after all the time we spent looking for him, Ezra's nowhere to be found. And we know absolutely nothing about where he could be, or if he's even alive. Just because we haven't found Ezra doesn't mean our time was wasted. Sabine crossed her arms. Then enlighten me. Tell me why you don't think 15 years of no Ezra is considered time well spent on a mission to find him. Asuka stopped in her tracks, mulling the question for a moment. Why do you think I only came to find you after 5 years? She asked eventually. I don't know, Sabine shrugged her shoulders harshly. I just thought it was one of your Force things, she sarcastically replied. Despite the snide remark, Asuka let out a soft chuckle. Well, you're not entirely wrong there. But that's not the only reason. Sabine narrowed her eyes in curiosity, her apprehension towards the topic dropping a little. What did Ezra say to you before he disappeared? Asuka prodded at her silence. The memory of his last words to her flashed in her mind. In the moment, Sabine felt her eyes drop, hearing his voice in her head as if he was right there next to her. I'm counting on you, she repeated as she closed her eyes. He said he was counting on me. Did he tell you what he was counting on you for? No, but I always assumed that it had something to do with protecting his home. But the Empire never attacked, and our most dangerous threats only came from some small-time criminals. I'm sure protecting Lothal was one of the things Ezra had in mind for you, Asuka explained. But I don't think that was all he expected you to do. Sabine furrowed her brows. What do you mean? What did you do during your time on Lothal? Asuka asked with a genuine curiosity in her voice. I never asked, but I couldn't imagine you just spending your time moping around in his tower, hoping that one day he would come back by himself. I didn't mope, Sabine hastily replied. Okay, maybe I did mope for a little bit, she eventually admitted. But let's get one thing straight, I didn't act like some lovesick girl. I had things I needed to do, things that Ezra needed me to do. What kind of things? Well, like I mentioned, I helped protect Lothal. We always expected the Empire to attack, and we couldn't always rely on the rebellion to keep them out. So Ryder asked me to help train some people to join his newly formed Lothal Defense Force, but since the Empire never came, they were mostly used to deal with pirates and small-time crooks. Well, a small army shouldn't have too much trouble doing something like that, Asuka hummed. What else? I guess I also helped repurpose the Imperial Academy into an art school. Once the militia had enough experienced people, it didn't need my help anymore. So I decided to help out somewhere else. I chipped in here and there, did some heavy lifting when they needed me to. But most of my time was invested into being a teacher. Couldn't get out of bossing people around, huh? Asuka joked. Sabine laughed in agreement, her mind momentarily drifting back to her time on Lothal. I guess I just wanted to give them the chance to become something else instead of a soldier. I've spent my whole life fighting the Empire, and I was never given the chance to think about what else I could have become. Regardless of who won, the war was going to end one day. At least this way, the next generation could grow to become something else, Asuka added. Sabine nodded. I didn't want those younger than me to go through what me and Ezra did. We didn't have a choice, it was my job to give them one. Anything else? Sabine went silent for a moment, her eyes glossing over as she recalled one of her latest memories. I visited Ezra's home, she eventually replied. The tower. I thought you stayed there. Not the tower, Sabine shook her head. His old home. What was the occasion? He had been gone for 3 years by then, Sabine answered. It was the anniversary of Lothal's liberation. Every year, Ryder holds a celebration to remind us of Ezra, and to make sure we remember what he sacrificed to give us. I attended the celebration each year and gave a speech every time. But for some reason, I just wasn't feeling it that day. Lowering her head, Sabine took a sharp breath in, fighting the tears forming in her eyes. I got tired of listening to stories of him. I thought about him every single day, and every single time I would listen to the tape he left me, just so that I wouldn't forget his voice. But that day, I just couldn't stand it. Hearing how he did what he did, it just hurt more than usual. So I left, skipped out on the speech that year, and wandered around elsewhere. And then you eventually ended up at his home, Asuka finished. What did you do when you found it? Nothing at first, Sabine replied. I just stared at it. Despite all we had done, the place was still abandoned. Covered in the filth and waste the Empire left behind. I don't know why, but seeing Ezra's home left like that, it hurt more than losing Ezra himself. It made me feel like the Empire never left. It didn't feel right, Asuka guessed, and Sabine nodded. I couldn't stand seeing it like that, so I decided to clean it up a bit. I started out by removing what I could. Anything which remotely could be classified as garbage, I took and moved them elsewhere. When I was done, I decided to start making the place look livable. First, I painted the outside. Using the supplies Ryder gave me, I was able to at least make the place look less like a dump and more like a home. When I was done with that, I worked on the inside. Using my own credits to buy furniture and other necessities to refurbish the entire house. So you renovated Ezra's childhood home? Asuka asked. I did more than that. I even rebuilt the entire block. In one night. Asuka exclaimed. What? No. That project took up all of my time for the next 2 years. I was just done finishing up on the final touches when you came along. But you did all that on your own. Did Ryder even know about it? Sabine nodded. He did, and he offered to help quite a few times. But I wanted to do this on my own. It's a shame I'm not there to see it, Asuka replied, feeling a bit regretful that she left Lothal in such a rush. What's it being used for now? Last I heard, Ryder's using it as an orphanage. He puts any lost children he finds in that place, and does what he can to find them a new family. It's nice to see Lothal being able to come into its own as a planet. Asuka placed an arm on Sabine's shoulders. I'm sure Ezra would be happy to know that you played such a big part in it. Sabine shook Asuka's hand off. You still haven't made your point. There's no reason for me to improve Lothal if Ezra's not there to see it. You're right. Asuka smiled. But you couldn't just leave Lothal to its own devices now, could you? It was his home, Ezra's home, and you did everything he expected of you and more. You helped the planet grow, gave it a purpose, and gave it its own means of defending itself in the battles which are yet to come. You're saying Ezra wanted me to babysit his planet for 5 years. I'm saying that when Ezra wasn't around to protect his home, he needed someone to do it for him while he was gone, and he needed someone he could trust, someone he could count on. Okay, so maybe those 5 years aren't wasted, Sabine admitted. Maybe they were necessary, and Lothal needed some guidance to grow. But what about now? Lothal is fine, and I'm not even there anymore. What have we been spending these 10 years doing if we haven't even found a clue of where Ezra could be? What do you think Ezra would do in your situation? Sabine stared confused at Asuka's question. You mean what would Ezra do if I disappeared for years and I had to ask him to find me? Asuka nodded. Probably the same thing like I would, Sabine replied. He would do whatever the equivalent of rebuilding my home is, and then once everything was stable enough, drop everything and come and find me. Would he ignore everything in his quest to find you? Asuka continued. The helpless people, those struggling in the aftermath of the Empire. Would he ignore them, just to find you a little bit faster? Would he expect you to do the same in this situation? Sabine went silent, already knowing the answers to Asuka's question. In these 10 years, we've seen and met so many different types of people, and they all had one thing in common. Asuka turned to Sabine. They were all still suffering from the grip of the Empire. There are people like these, all over the galaxy, Sabine. People who celebrated the fall of the Empire, but were too hurt by them to prosper under the New Republic. I know that the New Republic is doing what they can, but they can't help all of them. Which is why we need to step in and do our part. We can't leave these people alone the same way the Empire left them. What good will it be to find Ezra if we bring him back to a galaxy no better than the Empire? Sabine lowered her head, letting out another frustrated groan. I just miss him, she admitted, staring hopelessly at the ground. I know. Asuka placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. The path we're taking might be long, but it is a necessary one. And we have to follow it word for word if we want to find Ezra. I get it, I really do, Sabine replied apologetically. But sometimes I wish that we don't have to go through such a roundabout path to get what we want. I've lost so much already, can't I just get the one thing that's important to me back? We'll find him, I promise. Asuka pulled Sabine into a hug. Besides, if there's one thing I know, is that the Force tends to give us exactly what we're searching for when you least expect. A figure suddenly flew right past them, smashing the stall beside them into pieces. From the cluttered pile of wood, a masked figure clad in what looked like a suit of armor pulled itself out, rubbing its head in pain as it tried to regain its bearings. Hey! A voice called out from the opposite direction. Sabine and Asuka turned to the source, finding that a group of bandits was approaching. Hand over what you stole from us, and I'll make your death quick, the leader said, stepping forward. I'm not going to ask again. Never, the figure replied, pocketing something away from the bandits. You sure you want to challenge us, thief? The leader questioned. Because if you do, you've got more than a handful of blaster bolts coming your way. He snapped his fingers, and the rest of the group pointed their blasters at the figure. What sounded like a snicker resonated through the figure's mask. I think you're the ones who would get more than a handful of bolts coming your way, the figure taunted. The bandit shrugged candidly. Suit yourself. Now, being a Jedi and a Mandalorian, there was no way Sabine and Asuka could sit and watch idly by as a lone stranger was being fired upon. But before either of them could draw their weapons, the figure did something which neither of them expected. The familiar sound of an igniting lightsaber could be heard the moment the first bolt left the blaster, surprising the duo. But even more surprising was how efficiently the figure was able to deflect each and every one of the incoming bolts. Doing so with such skill as if it had received proper training. A Jedi! Asuka exclaimed, finally sensing the aura behind the figure. Sabine's ears immediately perked up. Ezra? She asked hopefully, her eyes glued stuck to the figure. Before she knew it, Sabine was already back on her feet, ready to rush in and embrace the one person she missed so dearly. But Asuka thankfully stopped her, sensibly pulling her back to the ground and away from the barrage of bolts. Hang on, Asuka insisted, staring at the figure. I don't think that's Ezra. Of course it's Ezra. Sabine exclaimed. Look. Who else would be this far out from the galaxy, is able to wield a lightsaber, and can easily manage to deflect all those blaster bolts? Asuka wasn't convinced by Sabine's argument. You'd be surprised, she replied. But we should at least be careful. Because whoever that person is, it doesn't feel like Ezra. The Force. Asuka nodded. Despite finally regaining her senses, Sabine still found herself tempted to just ignore Asuka's warning and rush in. So what should we do? Sabine asked, turning to Asuka. Mulling over the question, Asuka eventually decided. Whoever this guy is, it might not be too much of a stretch to say that they might know something about Ezra. She stood up. I think we're going to have to talk to this guy. Sabine hummed in agreement. Finally, something we both agree at. Underscore 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 underscore. The last bolt sailed right into the leader's chest, knocking him down and taking him out for good. With their leader dead, the remaining bandits seemed afraid, no longer as confident as they were before. Had enough? The figure taunted. Her only response was a shocked heap, and the immediate scattering of the rest of the bandits. Relaxing slightly, the figure let out a tired groan. At least she had gotten what she came for. She just wasn't expecting a fight to result from her actions. Better not tell Master about this, she thought, not wanting to worry him any more than necessary. Hey! You! Another voice suddenly called out. Immediately, the figure stiffened, and shifted back into battle mode. She pointed her lightsaber at the unfamiliar source, ready to defend herself once more. Whoa, Sabine quickly raised her hands up. We're not with those guys, she explained, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Glancing between both Asuka and Sabine, the figure relaxed its stance slightly, but still kept the saber up. Who are you? The figure asked, eyeing the two strangers up and down. What's a Mandalorian and a Skywalker doing so far out in this area of space? Skywalker. Asuka's ears perked up at the mention of that. Users of the site, the figure explained, but Asuka was still confused. Powers which extend from the mind. You mean the Force? Asuka guessed. Tilting its head, the figure lowered its lightsaber. My master called it that too. Master? Sabine repeated. Does your master by any chance have blue hair, about this tall, and eyes which looked like it would have nothing to worry about at all? The figure nodded her head, not just in agreement, but also finally understanding the situation. Sheathing her lightsaber, she brought her hands to her head, removing her mask. Master said that someone would come for him, she replied, shaking her head in relief once she was freed from her mask. But I never expected to be the one to find you first. Sabine took a step back as her eyes were met with the sharp red gaze of Achis. They reminded her of another Chiss, someone who Sabine wasn't as friendly with. "Who are you?" Asuka asked. The Chiss turned to Asuka. "I am Dapra Nusa, learner to the one you call Ezra Bridger. He lives among us, a human on Xela." Sabine could barely contain her excitement. "Ezra's your master." The Chiss nodded to her. "Can you take us to him?" Dappa. "You may call me Rainu," she quickly corrected. "And yes. It is my master's wish to be reunited with his old friends. But we must leave now. I have in my possession information vital to my people, and I must deliver it to them." "Ezra has you delivering a holocron?" Asuka asked, sensing the object. Somewhat surprised, Rainu quickly flashed the object to her two new companions. "Master has reason to believe that this holocron contains information which could shift the tides of our war. And I have no reason to doubt him." Whoa, hang on, what's this about a war?" Sabine exclaimed. "Is Ezra involved in this fight too?" Rainu narrowed her eyes impatiently. "Master is not only involved in our battle. He is also our only hope at victory. Underscore 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 underscore. With a soft clack, a small device ejected itself out from the console of the main computer. Its sound drew the attention of a young Chiss officer, whose bleary red eyes immediately pulled over to it. The Chiss carefully grabbed the device from its port, pulling it out and tucking it into the palm of his hands. Not intending to delay his task any more than necessary, the Chiss quickly made his way out of the room. He wasn't in any rush, however, just merely concerned with meeting the expectations which had been set on him by his commander. No one wanted to be the one who disappointed the second in command of the entire Chiss defense fleet after all. Scanning his ID badge, the Chiss eventually made his way into the command room. His eyes scanned through the sea of his fellow Chiss officers, searching for his commander. Unlike most of the people on his planet, his commander was a little bit different. He wasn't a Chiss to begin with, instead he was an outsider. Someone which the Grand Commander had brought in personally. Secondly, he also acted and looked very differently from everyone else, mainly thanks to the lack of blue in his skin and his extremely emotive facial expressions. So it wasn't too difficult to find him amongst the crowd. General Robbery the Chiss greeted once he had found his commander. "I have acquired the data you have requested." Turning in his chair, the familiar face of none other than Ezra Bridger stood up and smiled at his subordinate. "Kanin." Ezra replied, cheerfully taking the drive from his hands. "You're a lifesaver. This is going to help with my presentation with Thrawn later on." "It is no concern," General Kanin slightly bowed. "But perhaps next time it would be wiser of you to prepare this information beforehand." Ezra sheepishly smiled to himself as he rubbed the back of his head. "I guess if you're the one telling me, I should probably wisen up." "Please do, General, for all of our sakes." "But there's just so much else I'd rather do. Like look at this." Ezra pointed to the flowing data on his screen. "It's an entire archive filled with Jedi knowledge." Kanin rolled his eyes, unable to find it in himself to hide his exasperation. "If I may be frank, General," Kanin began, "I don't quite understand your fascination with the Jedi. You are a great leader among many other things, but I feel as if your obsession with them is holding you back from achieving greater heights." "Oh shucks, you flatter me," Ezra joked. Kanin frowned. "That was not my intention, General." A smile worked its way up Ezra's face. 10 years we've worked together, Kanin, and I still can't get you to laugh at one of my jokes. We Chiss do not partake in humorous activities lightly, General. Only in front of those we hold dear do we indulge ourselves." "You mean like family and close friends?" Ezra asked. But Kanin shook his head. "Around our mates, General, or people we are attempting to court." A rare mischievous glint crossed the Chiss's eyes. "Like you and your apprentice, Rainu." "Okay, now I think you're getting ahead of yourself." The thin line of Kanin's lips curled ever so slightly into a smirk. "Tell me, General, besides your apprentice, has anyone else ever laughed at your dry attempts of humor?" "Well, yeah, sure. There was Ezra began, but stopped himself when he realized that there was literally no one. I rest my case, Kanin declared triumphantly. I guess all that's left is your wedding. I can't tell if you're making fun of me, or flirting with me, Ezra huffed. Believe me, General. If I was flirting with you, you would know. Shaking his head at the preposterous statement, Ezra decided to change the subject. Speaking of Rain Yu, any news from her yet? She should be back by now. Kanin subtly perked up. I was just about to inform you, General. Rain Yu called in just a while ago. She was successful in her mission to acquire the holocron. She should be back here any minute now. She was. Ezra nearly jumped out of his seat. She found the holocron. I believe so. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go greet her immediately. Ezra declared before rushing out of the room, leaving behind a slightly irritated Chiss. With a heavy sigh, Kanin resigned himself into following his commander. He knew better than to try and stop him from running off and skipping out on his own work. It hadn't worked before, and it wasn't going to work now. Looks like his presentation to the Grand Commander was going to be delayed for yet another time. Underscore 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 underscore. General, I don't think you should go out of your way to greet your apprentice, Kanin chastised, eventually catching up to Ezra. She has the holocron, Kanin. Ezra countered. How can I not go and greet her? But your proposal to Thrawn can wait. Ezra finished. Centuries of lost Jedi texts are about to be unveiled right before my eyes. I can't just leave it for later. Kanin's eyes twitched at Ezra's easygoing attitude. His antics were starting to irk the Chiss, although he would never openly admit it himself. Of course, when the pair eventually arrived at the docking bays, there was no one there, as no one had arrived yet. So, Ezra was yet again given another excuse to procrastinate and put off his own responsibilities. If I may ask, General, Kanin began, hoping to convince his superior to return to his duties. What do you expect to learn from gathering all these ancient Jedi texts? Everything, Ezra answered simply. Whether or not you are gifted with the sight, there's plenty for us to learn from the Jedi. More than anyone, the Chiss understand the importance of learning from our ancestors. We absorb the knowledge of both our own failures and our successes, using each of them to help us grow, Kanin answered before narrowing his eyes. But with all due respect to your people, how much more can the Jedi actually teach us? As we've discovered, the Jedi nearly caused their own extinction by letting their pride impede their own judgments. They allowed the enemy to slip into their ranks, and perished because they refused to believe that their order had been infiltrated. I do not mean to question your decisions, General. I merely want to understand them, Kanin quickly added. Probably sensing the quiet turmoil in the Chiss's mind, Ezra turned to his subordinate, offering him an understanding smile. I know. Among all the Chiss I've worked with, you're the only one who questions me without any malicious intent, Ezra replied. The questions you ask me are genuine, and are meant to help you be a better subordinate. Kanin nodded. But, I do understand your concerns, and I apologize for not being so open in sharing the full reason as to why am I so obsessed over these texts. Have you been withholding things from Chiss High Command? Kanin asked. His tone sounded accusatory, but Ezra merely smiled at the allegation. Thrawn knows what I'm doing, if you're wondering, Ezra replied quickly. But he insisted that the knowledge of what I'm doing be kept extremely confidential. Kanin furrowed his brows. What is it exactly that you are doing? Well, I'll tell you one thing, you're absolutely right in saying that there isn't much we can learn from the Jedi of old, Ezra began. We've learned all we could from their failures, and there isn't much we can take from their successes. All we can learn from them is how we can each play our part in making the galaxy a better place. That on its own, is quite the lesson, but what I am looking for is a little bit more practical. Are you perhaps hoping to hone your skills as a Jedi? Kanin guessed. Ezra shook his head. The teachings of the ancient Jedi Order are a little bit too radical for me to use properly. Then why? Kanin asked. Why do you hunt so feverishly for these artifacts? Because their existence in the unknown regions proves the one thing I have suspected for the past few years. Ezra turned to his subordinate. The Jedi who traveled here have discovered the secret which our enemy has spent so long trying to hide. They uncovered the truths behind where our enemy has come from. Kanin widened his eyes. They've uncovered the home world of the Gysk. That is what I hope for, at least, Ezra replied. The ancient Jedi documented all of their findings about the Gysk, yet most people in the Empire or Republic knew close to nothing of them. What this tells me is that the Gysk knew that they were being observed by the Jedi, but didn't want to act against them to prevent being seen as a threat. So they allowed some information about them to be recorded, but acted only once the Jedi learned too much. That would explain why all the holocrons you've found previously contain the same set of information. Kanin exclaimed. The only thing the holocrons we've found so far mention about the Gysk is their physical features, and when or where they appeared. But we never found any mention of where they could have come from, or how they arrived. Ezra nodded. I believe the holocron that Rey has found to be the one which holds that missing information. It was the only holocron we found coming from the last millennia, and it is also the only one which was still in the possession of an ancient Sith cult, one which has devolved into a group of third-rate bandits apparently. But how could knowing where the Gysk come from help us in our war against them? Kanin asked. It would be a start at least, to better understanding our enemy. Ezra continued, too engrossed in his explanation to notice that a ship had just landed in the hangar. But one thing's for certain. Rey finding that holocron marks a turning point in our battle. And it's going to only be a matter of time before. Ezra wasn't even able to finish his sentence before the heavy weight of a full-armored Mandalorian came crashing onto him. Found you, you loat rat, a familiar voice whispered affectionately as it wrapped Ezra in a bone-crushing hug. Underscore 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 underscore. Sabine. Ezra managed to sputter out as he was tackled into the ground. What are you doing here? The young woman straddled the poor man as she stared at him with teary eyes. Sweet memories of her time with him flooded her mind. But just before she could succumb to the temptation to simply blurt out how much she loved him, the years upon years of loneliness, pain, and sorrow resurfaced. And in place of her undying affection, came a furious rage. You! Sabine screamed out, fists clenching his shirt. You! She repeated again, her eyes blazing in anger. Ezra recognized that look on her face, and he knew all too well how dangerous it was. He quickly put his hands up, hoping to get the opportunity to defend himself. Okay, I know you're mad, but ow. Hey. Her fists flew at his face before he could even say a word. Sabine pummeled him relentlessly to the ground, punching his head, beating his chest, doing all she could to release her anger. Do you know how you made me feel? She shouted as her fists drummed his chest. All those years, not even knowing if you were alive. Alone, without my best friend, without my partner. And then you told me that you counted on me. For what? You didn't even tell me what you wanted me to do. Sabine. Ezra began, but again Sabine cut him off. What if I messed up? What if I did something wrong? What if I did the exact opposite of what you wanted? Sabine. Ezra exclaimed as he finally grabbed hold of her fists. Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. Can you forgive me? He said, giving her his most charming smile. But instead of calming her down, it only made her angrier. You can't just smile this all away. She said as she ripped her arms out from his grip and slapped him hard across the face. Ow. Sabine. Wait, not the hair, not the hair. With a hand on her mouth, Asuka tried her best to not let her laughter slip out. With all the emotions Sabine had repressed over the years, she wondered how it would look once she saw Ezra again. But nothing could have prepared her for the hilarious and chaotic mess which was the two of them. On Sabine's side of things, more and more of her anger was starting to dissipate as she beat Ezra up. She could tell that it was only going to be a matter of time before she moved on from attacking his face to full-on planting her lips on it. But before that moment came, she felt herself being lifted up. her body suddenly hovering inches away from Ezra's, not close enough to keep hitting him, but far enough that it was as if she was being taunted. "Ezra Bridger. Don't you dare use the Force on me to try and get out of this," Sabine warned, her rage flowing right back. I'm not," Ezra replied, looking as confused at the situation as she was. It was only then did the two of them glance behind, and notice that Renu was watching them with her hands stretched out. "I would feel very much grateful if you do not harm my master any more than you already have," she said as she floated Sabine a short distance away and unceremoniously dropped her face first. "Ow," Sabine groaned, shifting her anger towards Renu. "What was that for?" she demanded. But the young Chiss simply ignored her, choosing to instead tend to her master with more affection than one would normally expect. "Robbery, are you okay?" Renu asked, running her hands across Ezra's body so as to check for any visible injuries. "Renu, I'm fine," Ezra insisted, embarrassed. "You know she wasn't going to hurt me, right? And you didn't have to drop her like that." Renu turned away from him. She wasn't being very friendly, she reasoned, casting a sidelong glance towards Sabine. "And I didn't like the way she was treating you." Ezra responded by smiling softly, somewhat understanding the protective nature of his apprentice. "Well, I think I deserved some of that treatment," he admitted, casting an apologetic look to Sabine. "But I do appreciate the fact that you jumped in to try and protect me, despite not knowing everything about the situation." Avoiding his gaze, Renu darted her head away in order to hide a blush which of course, everyone but Ezra managed to catch. "So, I see you guys have met Renu," Ezra said, turning his attention back to his old friends. Asuka nodded in response, ignoring the look that Sabine was giving her for not offering to help her up. "We met her when she was in action back on Dextal," she replied. "You've done well to train her for someone who has yet to be officially knighted." "Thanks," Ezra sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. "But if we're being honest, Renu is just that good of a student. We went through all of Kanan's teachings in half the time it took him to teach me." Once again, Renu tried to hide her blush at Ezra's praises. "I only learn fast because you teach so well," Master Renu insisted, not willing to be the sole bearer of any compliments. "If it was anyone else, it would have taken me much longer to digest the information." "Well, if it was anyone else, you probably wouldn't be as interested," Kanin whispered to himself from the side, earning himself a glare from Renu. "Either way, you shouldn't downplay your achievements," Ezra continued. "You've done well learning from someone like me. I'm proud of you." Ezra smiled earnestly, causing Renu to beam at him in response. There was a little bit of an uneasy feeling forming in the pit of Sabine's stomach as she watched the two interact. It was weird seeing him after so long, but it was even weirder seeing him getting so close with someone else. For a moment Sabine wondered if her place in his life had been taken over, that she had been replaced by someone else just because it took her so long to find him. But the look on his face when he turned to look at her washed all those feelings away. "But enough about me, you guys are actually here," Ezra declared cheerfully. "It might have taken 15 years, but man, I still can't even believe you guys managed to find me." "It wasn't that easy, you know," Sabine chuckled. "The amount of places we had to visit, people we had to meet and help to get us here. Did you know that there's another Jedi Order now?" "No way," Ezra replied excitedly. "There's so many things I want to ask you. How's Hera doing? Did we win? Are we still called the Rebellion? Has Lothal changed much?" The flurry of questions made it seem as if everything had returned to normal, and a grateful smile formed on Sabine's face at the thought. But before they could go on and share more about their stories, Renu decided that now was the time to remind Ezra why he was actually here. "Master," she called out, tugging his wrist. "I think it would be best if you were to delay your reunion for now." Renu reached into her pocket, pulling out the holocron she stole. "I've found it, Master, and from what I can tell, this is exactly what you have been looking for." Ezra's eyes immediately perked up at the sight of the old Jedi relic. He palmed the object in his hands, feeling the surge of knowledge rushing through his mind. "You did it," Ezra declared, finally remembering why he came here in the first place. This changes everything." He cut himself off as he turned to look at Sabine. While it had been years since Sabine last laid eyes on Ezra, it didn't take her long to understand the look he was giving her. It was a look of conflict, one which was very familiar to her mainly because she gave him the exact same look once before. Much like how Sabine had to struggle in order to choose between the two important families in her life, now Ezra was struggling to choose between the two important priorities he now had. Sabine remembered what Ezra told her that day when she confided in him, how he supported her when she told him she was considering leaving. There was nothing Sabine wanted more than to finally be with her friend, to confess her feelings to him and live happily ever after. But she was damned if she wasn't going to be there for him the same way he was for her. Go on ahead, Sabine said, trying to hide the disappointment behind her smile. We can always catch up later. Sabine, you're the best, Ezra said, smiling apologetically. There's going to be a party later on tonight. Well, maybe more like an annual gala of some sort. We're celebrating the anniversary of Thrawn's return to Xela. Thrawn? Sabine asked. Why are you celebrating anything related to that blue freak? Ezra smiled sheepishly. Well, that blue freak happens to be my boss. You work for Grand Admiral Thrawn. Yeah. Ezra replied. He's actually not that bad, you know. And you trust him? Sabine quirked an eyebrow. I guess so, Ezra shrugged. I mean, I'm training his daughter after all. Thrawn has a daughter. Sabine nearly shouted. And it's you. Reynu merely narrowed her eyes before turning to Ezra. Master, I don't think this can wait. Right, Kanin, would you mind helping show my friends to one of the empty quarters? I think they could use some rest before tonight's party. Of course, General Kanin bowed. Great. Well, I guess I'll see you tonight. Ezra declared before running off with Reynu. Sabine watched as the two left her sight, the strange feeling in her stomach rising once more. Sue. Asuka prodded, cheekily poking Sabine's face. Looks like you have another rival. Sabine turned to Asuka. What do you mean? She innocently asked. Hera told me all about all the other girls who Ezra has managed to charm. Asuka smiled slyly. On a scale of 1 to 10, how jealous are you feeling right now? Staring at the older Togruta dryly, Sabine replied. You have got to stop talking to Hera. Underscore 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 underscore. Boring, bland, colorless, plastic. These were probably the words anyone would use when describing a party hosted by the infamous blue-skinned beings known as the Chiss. Their extreme lack of emotions was a very well-known fact amongst the individuals who were aware of their existence. And even to those who did not know of them, only a single glance was needed to know how inexpressive they could be. Even Sabine herself has expected the event to be quite drab. The only Chiss Sabine was familiar with was that of Thrawn. And anyone who saw him would expect that events hosted in his name would look more practical in nature instead of celebratory. It was safe to say that Sabine's expectations were completely cleaved in half the moment she entered the grand hall. A large chandelier that looked like it was made of pure light hung proudly from the ceiling. Multiple rays of lights flickered off of it, illuminating the room with a vast array of colors. The colorful display was further accentuated by the pure white porcelain floors, making Sabine feel as if she was walking on clouds. Soft fluffy clouds with a colorful glow radiating from behind them. For a species who was supposed to keep their emotions under wraps, they sure did know how to impress. Amazing, Sabine whispered to herself. Her eyes were constantly being treated with a desert of colors. The inner artist inside of her held an even greater appreciation for the sight before her. It was quite difficult to imagine Thrawn or one of his own people being behind something like this. Breathtaking, isn't it? A familiar voice said from behind her. One which sent shivers down her spine, but not in a good way. Almost instantly, Sabine leapt backwards. Instinctively reaching to the side of her belt in search of her blaster. Thrawn, Sabine hissed, hands firmly stuck around the grip of her weapon. More than anything, Sabine wanted to pull her blaster out and fill the former Grand Admiral with as many bolts as possible. The amount of pain this man had brought to her and her family was reason enough to take him out. Miss Wren, Thrawn greeted in his usual cold voice, undeterred by her show of aggression. I was told by General Bridger that you had arrived just this morning. Allow me to take this opportunity to congratulate you on successfully finding your lost spectre. As Bridger would most likely say, better late than never. Sabine stared blankly at what she guessed was an attempt at a joke by Thrawn. The thought of him even trying to tell one sounded so foreign to her, especially when you considered the fact that they were enemies before. Did he actually say that? Sabine asked eventually. The lips of Thrawn curled ever so slightly downward into what looked like a frown. I was told that such statements would elicit emotions of humor, and help break the ice between us. It didn't. Sabine blinked awkwardly. Thankfully, before the situation could turn even more uncomfortable, Ezra finally appeared. Hey! You made it! Ezra greeted cheerfully, standing right beside Thrawn. How's the party so far? Do you like the light display? I insisted on having it placed here the moment I saw it. And I see that Thrawn has already come by to see you. Hope you guys aren't feeling a little bit weird given what happened the last time the two of you met. I believe our reunion went as well as can be expected, Thrawn answered. But your suggestion on how to break the ice was not a good one. Well, with how well we know each other now, I hardly doubt that has anything to do with what I told you to say, but rather how you delivered it, Ezra replied in an amused tone. By the way, where's Ahsoka? He asked, turning to Sabine. She decided not to come. Sabine smiled, happy to focus on something else besides Thrawn. I think the trip tired her out. Thrawn rubbed his chin at the response. Such a shame, I was very much looking forward to conversing with her, he remarked. And why is that? Sabine asked, arching her eyebrow. Because I knew her master, Thrawn replied, carefully turning to face Sabine. And I wanted to know more about him from her. Her master? Ezra chimed in, interested in the topic. I worked under him once, Thrawn explained. And he was an efficient warrior. Ruthless in his actions, unforgiving in his ways. Despite what he had become, he was a great leader, and he is someone I wouldn't mind working with again. Sabine crossed her arms. It sounds like you're telling the truth. That is because I am, Miss Wren. Thrawn turned sharply to Sabine, slightly glaring at her. I do not lie, and I show respect to those who deserve it. I would have preferred to share my thoughts on the matter to Mr. No personally, but I guess it would have to wait. I'm sure Ahsoka would be more than pleased to hear that about her master, Ezra quickly interjected, preventing any further hostilities. I'll make sure to pass on your message to her personally. If you would be so kind. Thrawn bowed his head gratefully, before turning to face Sabine. And to you, Miss Wren. I am not so blind to be unable to sense some remnants of hostility between the two of us. At least I don't have to spell it out, Sabine bitterly spat. But Thrawn remained undeterred. There is nothing I can do that can pay you back for all the pain I've caused. All I can offer is my apologies, and my promise that as long as you do not harm my people, I will work to correct my transgressions. Were it anyone else, Sabine could have probably forgiven the man. But no. Every time she even thought of Thrawn, she saw Kanan dying, burning in the silo he created. She may have gotten over his death, but there was no way that a simple sorry was going to be enough. It's going to take more than that to fix what you did, Sabine began, clenching her fists. Ezra could sense the anger in her. He placed an arm on her shoulder, hoping to calm her down. It wasn't personal, he explained. The only reason he did the things he did was to protect his people. That doesn't change the fact that he caused Kanan's death. Sabine nearly shouted. And, he killed and harmed countless people on Lothal, your own home. How could you just forgive him for that? I didn't, Ezra replied, glancing at Thrawn. I just learned to live with it. He hurt my people, and he hurt my family. But in the end, he did it so that his people could be safe. How is that any different from us? Sabine glared at Ezra, but eventually felt her hard expression soften. He still killed Kanan, she whispered. If I may add, the death of Kanan Jarrus caused more harm to my grand plan than good, Thrawn added, earning him a rightful glare from the pair. Sabine, you don't have to like him. Ezra turned his attention back to Sabine. In fact, I don't even like him. Thrawn is many things, but he's trustworthy. Take it from me. As long as you don't try and hurt his people, he will always have your back. Sabine stared into Ezra's eyes. I don't know if I can trust him. You don't have to trust him. You just have to trust me, Ezra smiled. Can you do that? Letting out a chuckle, Sabine let her hands fall into his. I won't even have to try. Before things could grow more intimate between the two, Thrawn let out an uncomfortable cough. Perhaps, you might want to express your emotions somewhere more private, he suggested, pointing at the people giving the couple weird looks. Oh, shut up, Thrawn, Sabine cursed, taking a few steps back. If Ezra's fine with you, then I guess I'll be fine with you. Just don't expect me to give speeches in your honor. Thrawn let out something of a chuckle. I would expect nothing less from you, Miss Wren. Turning his attention from the couple, Thrawn glanced around the room. General Bridger, Thrawn called. I was expecting my daughter to come with you. Will she not be joining us tonight? I think she will, Ezra replied, soothing Thrawn's paternal worries. After we fiddled with the holocron for a bit, she told me to leave without her. Something about needing more time to get ready for tonight. I thought she would have told you about this. Thrawn smirked. I think this is one of those things where she would very much prefer not to tell me about. Before Ezra could ask why, he felt something shifting in the Force. In perhaps what one would consider a dramatic fashion, the doors to the Great Hall swung open with a bang. The crowd immediately went silent, watching with mouths agape as the elegant figure of Rey New waltzed on in. She looked extremely different from her previous self. Instead of her robes she wore a long flowing gown, the tips of which danced across the floor in tandem with her movements. The fabric swayed in such a way that it gave her a sort of angelic feel to her. And as her eyes searched for Ezra, her elegance did not diminish. It only heightened as her eyes met his, and she made her way towards him. Master Rey New greeted, her eyes shyly rose to his as she offered him a courteous bow. Rey New, you look great. Ezra complimented, smiling widely at his apprentice. The aforementioned Chiss kept her bashful demeanor, smiling at him softly as her eyes fluttered nervously at him. Daughter, Thrawn cleared his throat. It would seem that you have spent your time wisely in preparation for tonight. Rey New narrowed her eyes on her father. It would seem so, father, she replied bluntly. Should I wish you luck in your plans for tonight? Thrawn asked. No need, father, Rey New replied. Whatever happens tonight will not be because of luck. Smiling, Thrawn turned his attention to the three of them. Perhaps it is time for me to take my leave, he decided. I believe it would be best for all of us if I allowed you young people to mingle, he said before nodding slightly and stepping away. Rey New, you look great. Sabine repeated, lacking the social skills to come up with something more creative. Thank you, Bine, Rey New replied, offering a courteous smile. I also find your attire to be extremely fanciful, she continued, trying to look as interested as possible. Well, you two seem to get along well, Ezra commented, the smile never leaving his face. But before either of them could make a comment about Ezra's obliviousness, the atmosphere around them suddenly shifted. Lights started being dimmed, and the melody slowed. In its place the music changed tunes into one which was more attention-drawing, no longer content with being a simple background piece. And with its changing harmony, came a changing attitude. One by one, people started stepping onto the dance floor, abandoning their more reserved nature for something more sentimental. What's happening? Sabine said in a whisper, afraid to break the heavy emotion in the air. We have no word for it. We simply call it the dance, Rey New explained to Sabine, but her eyes were mostly focused on Ezra. It is a yearly ceremony which celebrates the heart, and all the emotions which come with it. It reminds us that we are not beings without emotion. Rather, we are beings which suppress them, only allowing ourselves to express them to the people we hold the most dear. It is a beautiful tradition, Ezra continued, eyes transfixed on the many Chiss who took to the floor. Even after seeing it for many years, I still feel a bit touched about it. With a deep breath, Rey New cast away the doubt in her mind. Losing all of the elegance she held before, she pushed herself right to Ezra, clasping his hand in hers and drawing his attention. Master, she started, before shaking her head. Robbery. The ceremony is more than just a simple tradition. It is a declaration. A declaration to remain with the one you love for the rest of your life. Rey New quickly pulled her gaze back to the floor. Even someone as oblivious as Ezra was starting to understand the meaning behind her words. You have been here for so long that I feel you have already become one of us, Rainu continued, returning her eyes back to his. But now, I want you to become one with me. She let go of his arm, stepping back onto the dance floor with an invitation for him to join her. Robbery, would you do me the honor of dancing with me? Ezra's heart thumped in his chest. Despite his experiences, he still was not used to the idea that someone would want to be with him romantically. Perhaps he was just insecure, unwilling to take that final step and believe that he was desirable. Or perhaps he just never let go of the one who really mattered. Rainu, I don't know what to say, Ezra began, sweat starting to pool in his palms. You could say yes, Rainu replied hopefully. Say yes, and see where this goes. The moment Ezra's lips parted to give a reply, Sabine's world stopped. Was he going to do it? Was he going to accept Rainu's invitation? Had she lost him just as she managed to find him? And then he turned to look at her, casting her a look as if he was asking her for permission. Permission to dance with someone else. Ezra knew he didn't need to ask Sabine for that. No, he wasn't asking for permission. He wanted to see her reaction. Because despite it all, he only ever wanted to see her happy. Whether she was with him or not, all he ever cared about was her happiness. Wait, she blurted out in response, breaking the spell between master and apprentice. And although only a single word was said, the emotion behind it was clear as day, and that was all the meaning Ezra needed. Rainu, Ezra said firmly, clasping her shoulders. I'm sorry. I never realized that you thought of me this way. But even if I did, I just... He turned to glance at Sabine, finding strength once more. I always thought of you as something of a little sister, and I'm sorry I couldn't see you as something more. Rainu lowered her head in disappointment. I understand, she said in a low tone. If someone has already taken your heart, then I have no right to stay for what remains. Lifting her head, she cast a small smile towards Ezra. I love you, Robbery. And you will always hold a special place in my heart. I'm really sorry, Ezra repeated again, feeling guilty. But Rainu only smiled at him. There is nothing to be sorry for. You are a wonderful person, and you have given me plenty of reasons to love you. It should be of no surprise to me that you have also given others the same reasons, she replied, glancing at Sabine. Perhaps my only regret is not meeting you earlier, as it might have allowed for me to be in a more favorable position. You've always been the more mature one between the two of us, Ezra smiled. I wish I could make it up to you somehow. There is no need, Rainu bowed. Enjoy your reunion, master, she said before stepping back and leaving into the crowd. Ezra stared sadly as Rainu disappeared from his sight. He may not have reciprocated her feelings for him, but it still hurt knowing that he was causing so much pain. Sorry you had to go through that, Sabine said, slowly approaching Ezra. Do you think she's going to be fine? I know she is, Ezra replied, turning his gaze back to Sabine. It may get a little bit awkward later on, but we'll figure it out. If you want to talk about it. No, Ezra shook his head. I'm not going to talk about some other girl in front of the one I love. It took a few moments for Ezra's words to really click in Sabine's mind. When it did, her eyes widened, and her heart thumped excitedly in her chest. You mean, me? She asked, afraid she had somehow heard wrongly. Of course, Ezra smiled. It's always been you, Sabine. And it will never be anyone else. Tears welled up in Sabine's eyes. For years she had dreamt of this moment. Years of what-ifs, and what could have been. But now here she was, the offer she had always dreamed of, right in front of her. We can take it slow, one step at a time. The last thing I want to do is mess things up with you. No matter what happens, I want to do right by you. Sabine's eyes snapped at the mention of taking it slow. With a hard grip, she dragged Ezra's lips to hers, before pushing herself firmly against his body. I've waited an entire lifetime for this, USHEB. I'm not going to go slow with you anymore, she said, crashing her lips against his once more. And as the music slowly drowned out behind them, only one thing ran through Sabine's head. Ezra was finally hers.